OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
Yes, it is still only Tuesday, but you're very welcome along to OTB AM this morning. It's myself and Neil Treacy with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. We'd love to hear from you. A very busy show for you and lots to get your teeth stuck into. 087 9180 180 is the number. That's 087 9180 180. You can WhatsApp us there. You can text us as well. Or you can leave a comment for us on Instagram. We read all those and we're going to bring you some of them as well. A little bit later on, we're going to be talking about the role of PE, particularly in the time of the pandemic. This is part of our feature about the future of Irish sports, in particular grassroots Irish sports. So there's a big conversation about the future of grassroots Irish football last night, and yesterday we kicked this off when we were talking. It wasn't essentially just about GAA, but we did have Pat Daley from the GAA and Jason Sherlock on. And today we're going to talk a little bit about rugby. Neil, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, Ger. How are you this morning?
Yeah, good. I'm bringing you in here as our dedicated rugby man on the team. You grew up playing rugby. What was your experience like? One of the key things that they're trying to do in New Zealand is to make people stick with their sport for as long as possible by bringing back the enjoyment. And, you know, we've kind of been talking around this a little bit over the last few days, but what were the enjoyment levels like as a kid growing up playing rugby?
Yeah, well, I suppose I kind of arrived to rugby later enough. Like I was probably 11 or 12 when I took up rugby. I would have started out playing soccer and GA and stuff like that beforehand. But yeah, it was something I was kind of saying yesterday after listening to the show. Some things that Pat Daley were saying I found really interesting, and it was specifically the line about how for so long the mentality was, you know, keep the best, forget the rest, and it just started making me thinking about when I was a kid playing sport and the experiences I had, because I would say I was on teams across all sports, to be honest, that were good and bad. The experiences I had, like I would say at pretty much all sports I played, I was further down the class in terms of talent. I would say, you know, I wasn't particularly good at anything, but I was keen. I wanted to play everything, you know. I was a sports mad kid. So I would say on the rugby side specifically, like when I took up rugby at 11, I probably would have played with, I don't want to name the team, to be honest, because I don't think it's necessarily a problem with the club itself. You know, it was just a couple of dads running the team, so I wouldn't particularly want to tar the club. But, you know, I didn't really have a good experience. Like, you know, I wasn't a particularly good player. And
what age is this?
That probably would have been under 12s, 13s, you know, for those couple of years. So they would have been a very, very good team. They would have been, like, you know, challenging to win leagues or cups or things like that. And, you know, I hardly ever would have played a match. So, you know, you might get a couple of minutes towards the end of a game if you're hammering someone. And I probably stuck at that for a couple of years. Now, I'd say, to be honest, the reason I probably did keep playing it was because concurrently I was actually playing in school as well, where it was loads of fun and you had huge numbers, so that anytime there was a match on, there was an A and a B game. So even if you were playing in the B game, you were having fun and you were enjoying it. And, you know, worst case scenario, you were probably playing at least half of one match, if not close to a full 60 or 70 minutes or however long the time was in that. So that was probably the reason I kept playing the sport itself. So
just to tease it out, so you're going under 13? Is that kind of maybe your last season? Is that what we're talking about?
I probably would have started out the under 14 season. Okay, so and then after a few weeks, God, you know what? I don't want to do this
because you'd lived the experience through under 13. So you're going to matches. Is there away matches? My memory of playing rugby is that it's like very early, very cold on Saturday mornings. That you were getting up and meeting in the town square and travelling freezing. And then getting there, and sometimes you'd be standing on the sideline, and it would be, you know, your breath is there, and it's like, this is great. I'm delighted that I got out of my nice warm bed, and I'm not watching Saturday morning TV and eating an extra bowl of cereal to come and experience this. So what was that like? What were it was Saturday morning, I presume, is it?
No, it was Sunday. Sunday morning was rugby down in Limerick anyway. Yeah, no, that was pretty much the experience, and I suppose probably like, you know, 14 of you crammed into the back seat of a car, whether or not that was legal, but look, we all went through that. But yeah, it was probably that case of you know, you're standing around freezing your arse off for for a couple of hours on a Sunday morning. And probably do you know what probably the other one would have been was the feeling of leaving afterwards and being one of like the 3 or 4, because I probably wasn't the only person in that situation, but probably one of the 3 or 4 clean kids. Because, you know, you're talking about playing like rugby in the depths of winter and you're walking off and your shorts are clean. There's, you know, a couple of little mud patches on your knees, and that's probably the extent of it. But so, yeah, eventually after that, you just kind of stop doing it, because you're like, what's the point in, you know, going down on, you know, whether you've training during the week as well or going down on the weekends and doing it. And it was probably only through a bit of sheer luck that I would have got back into it with a different club. The club I ended up playing with, Old Crescent. Now, they would have been in my age group. They would have been the complete whipping boys. Like, they'd lose every game 40 or 50-0. They'd be the joke team. But I think it was a friend of mine called me up one Thursday or Friday evening and said they had a match that night. They were short on players like they always were. Any chance I'd come down and play a match? And I said, you know what? Yeah, I'll go down and play. And just loved it, because, you know, the focus was on everyone was getting a bit of a crack. Everyone was getting on and actually playing a game. Even when they actually, on the rare occasion when they had, you know, plentiful numbers, they'd be rotating players in and out and making sure everyone got a fine run. And, you know, they still taught you the basics. They still made sure that you knew how to tackle safely. They made sure you knew how to do lineouts, and, you know, how to scrummage, and, you know, how to properly pass the ball, and, you know, all the, I suppose, the technical parts of rugby. But it was probably just the fact that it was that particular team was run by people who really wanted to make sure that the kids out there were enjoying the game of rugby and wanted to come back every week. And as a result, I kept playing with them all the way down through the years. And eventually, you know, we actually turned into a half-decent team that was able to pull off the odd win every now and again, and, you know, still enjoy ourselves and still make sure everyone got a run. And it was just some of those things that Pat was saying yesterday that would have really struck a chord with me about making sure everybody is there and actually enjoying the game. Because I think if everyone's enjoying it, everyone is going to keep playing. And if everyone keeps playing, eventually you're going to have enough teams that you're going to be able to do, you know, you're able to have the A and a B match and make sure that everyone's getting not just 20 minutes of rugby into them or 20 minutes of football or hurling, but they're going to be able to play 60 minutes each.
You also didn't really care about whether or not the team won the match. You wanted to have the crack, like
yeah.
And that's like the central tenet of what the New Zealand Sport New Zealand has come up with is like, can we just not make this about everybody having fun so that people stop dropping out? The whole, I mean, you're literally the poster child for this whole thing, where it's like a super competitive team wouldn't give game time to somebody, so he drifts away from the sport until he gets sucked back in and then has a lifetime of involvement. I think you still play now, right?
I would have stopped playing. I stopped playing when I was 25, but that was more down to the fact that I was working every weekend. So I was never around to, like, you know, I couldn't really get out. Literally, I couldn't get out that much to play. But I went back last year and had a crack at it again. And, you know, only for COVID, I'd be still going again. But look, when things are lifted, I'll be going back out training all over again.
Yeah, I think that like is really interesting. That actually, if that first team had just given you a bit of game time and had not had the win at all cost mentality, because people wonder about this win at all cost mentality. Do you have to, you know, are you giving the Paul O'Connell fear of God speech week in, week out to kids under 10, under 12, under 14? It's not. It can be far more subtle than that. It can just be picking the best players, playing them the whole game, and never giving people game time. And it's a really simple thing. It you know, you don't feel like you're being super aggressive, but you're just not sharing around the minutes.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say, to be honest as well, I'd feel very lucky that there was such a strong rugby culture in the school I was going to. So I was still playing the game 2-3 times a week with them. You were training twice a week, and you probably had a match on a Saturday or maybe on a Wednesday afternoon as well. And the fact that there were so many kids at my age level who would have been playing in that, you know, you were never wondering about, am I going to get 5 minutes off a bench here? You know, even if you were coming off the bench, you were probably playing at least half a match. So had it not been for that, I could probably have, you know, completely lost interest in rugby and, you know, not be boring you several times a week talking about scrums.
Well, I think your story is probably replicated thousands, if not tens of thousands, and potentially hundreds of thousands of times between then and now, with kids who did drop out and didn't go back and weren't in a rugby school. For example, if you'd been in a normal school where they played a game once a week or once whatever sport is on the curriculum, then you could have been lost to sport forever. And I guess the whole point is here that we're trying to make people active participants for all sorts of reasons, for mental health, for society, for general health reasons as well. We had a lot of comments on this. We asked people on Twitter and Instagram last night, did you quit playing sport because it got too demanding or competitive? Hey OTB, I quit playing Gaelic and soccer when I was around 14 because the coaches were too competitive and wouldn't give any of the subs a chance. Jim on Instagram says certain coaches continuously selecting players who never go to training. It's a big issue in the GAA. Finzo says the fun went out of it, no crack at it anymore. Sometimes I wish I grew up playing in the 80s. I don't know when you were talking about Finzo, but I don't think it was any different then. Hugo Martin says it all got too demanding. Travel from Dublin to Leitrim every weekend, and sometimes midweek as well. The commitment of club players to go back and play club GAA or club rugby or club soccer after they've gone to college, for example, is something that's absolutely huge. And I wonder, I understand that they're the lifeblood and they've come up through the club, but those clubs might not survive if those people didn't go back for those games. But that's the type of thing that turns it into this kind of like a long distance relationship with somebody who you never really see that much. David says, no, I love the competition. However, the nepotism, cronyism and backhandedness at local level made me quit. All right, okay, I get everything's political. Femi on IG says, yes, I quit, especially after I got to college and I wasn't getting my game. Something had to give, sadly. The fun element just goes. You're always chasing fun that you had in your childhood when you're playing in your later years, and encourage multiple sports when young. Don't specialise or streamline too soon. You played loads of sports. That was the other thing, that you kind of at least had this kind of hinterland to get back into.
The only thing I probably stopped playing at an early age was hurling. I probably played hurling when I was I took up Gaelic football and hurling. You kind of take up both together when I was 5 or 6 or whatever, and I'd say I was about 8 and I packed in the hurling because this is going to make me sound like an absolute softie. I got an absolute wallop of a hurl right across the shin, and from that day on I was just like, no. Do you know what?
Enough.
No, that's enough. Wasn't an issue whatsoever with coaching or anything like that. I'll put my hands up on that one. That was just no. I'm not cut out for this sport.
That's fair enough. If you've got a similar story to Neil Treacy, we'd love to hear it this morning. 0879 180 180 is the number, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube channel, OTB AM, live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. The big news yesterday was obviously that Frank Lampard was sacked, and he's been replaced by Thomas Tuchel. They wasted absolutely no time in getting a manager in who speaks German and might be able to reclaim the massive amounts of money that they've invested in Chelsea on the players who speak German in particular. I don't know how much sympathy people have for Frank Lampard. There was certainly a little bit of it knocking around yesterday. Neil, did you kind of have any pangs?
I didn't really. There were heaps of it. Depending on who you follow on Twitter, if you follow a lot of the English football hacks, for some reason they had decided that poor Englishman Frankie Lampard getting the sack was the final straw after 20 years of Chelsea chopping and changing managers. For some reason, it didn't seem to be a major issue for them until, the English manager got sacked. Everyone was saying for so long, oh, it's going to be fine, he's going to be given time. I think Thomas Tuchel, for example, I think he's going to be given time if he's there or thereabouts in the top 4. And he can kind of convince the board, do you know what, the title challenge might be a couple of months away, or a couple of years away, I should say, but I'm going to make sure you're in the top 4 every single season. I'm going to make sure you might get to a quarter final or something like that will have a good cup run, that we're going to be completely relevant. It's not a case of that we're going to bottom out and eventually in 2 years we're going to be good enough to challenge for a title. With the squad he had, the performances he was putting together were not good enough. And, the league position they were in was not good enough. With the squad they have, it wasn't good enough. And I think he'd been talked up for a long time, and look, eventually he just wasn't doing it.
Apparently Thomas Tuchel has been told, get in the title race. And not next season or the season after, Neil, this season. Compete for the title this year. That's the instructions.
I don't know how he does that. I'll be honest, I couldn't even tell you how far they are off the top, because once you get, a certain distance off the top of the table,
I'm going to guess 12 points.
I'm not really judging your position based on how far off the top you are, if you know what I mean.
11 points.
He's not getting back into the title race. Surely not.
It'd be 12 if Man City win their game in hand. I mean, they're only 5 off Liverpool,
I don't really see it. Like, I think he can get them back up to the top 4, but like for them to be getting up towards the title, he's not only relying on them going on quite a good run, but he needs a lot of teams to start dropping points. Like, I know Liverpool could get back into a title race. All they need is for a couple of teams ahead of them to start dropping points. But Chelsea need several teams to start slipping up left, right and centre.
Look, I mean, they need to go on a 10-game winning streak where all of their star signings start scoring goals for them to realistically be considered dark horses at that stage. And that assumes that Manchester City start dropping points because Kevin De Bruyne is injured. The one thing about this is that I did think that perhaps, and Abramovich clearly felt something personal because he put his name in the statement and spoke in the statement, which is rare enough for that to happen. Maybe it happened with Avram Grant as well, I'm not sure. But I did feel like perhaps this was going to be a bit where they decided to give some time and back the manager. But ultimately, that's not the culture that Chelsea have used over the last 2 decades since he's arrived and put all his money in, and it's been very successful for them. They win leagues. They've won 2 out of the last 5 league titles. It feels like it's been a long time since they competed, because since then we've had the brilliant team from Man City and the brilliant team from Liverpool, and those 2 teams are still kind of in their cycle, and it doesn't look like they've completely come off it just yet. If next season starts and Virgil van Dijk is fully fit, then you would expect Liverpool to be contenders for the title again. The thing is that this is who Chelsea are, and so if Tuchel works or doesn't work, the next manager is going to be along in 18 months anyway, really.
Yeah, and Frank Lampard would have had to have known that himself going into it, that granted he was told you're going to have time, but at the end of the day, there are certain standards to the job as well. Like even Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, he has had to stay somewhere relevant in the European places. Chelsea they've been an absolute disaster since probably December. And I am going to be really interested to see what Tuchel does, because I think he probably has a lot to prove off the back of the PSG spell, where I think there was probably a general consensus that he was just walking out every day with a bag of footballs and opening it up and rolling it out to Neymar and Mbappe and the best players in the world, and just kind of, there you go, lads, work away. And I think there's probably more scope for him to show what he's about in the Premier League, because at PSG, the bare minimum is that you're winning the French title and you're getting to the latter stages of the Champions League. Whereas with Chelsea, he can be in that top 4 mix for a season or so and be, roughly challenging and be putting something together. Where there are steps with Chelsea, there are levels of progression that you can get through.
Yeah.
Whereas with PSG, it was you either hit this bar or you're a failure.
Yeah, and look, he was pretty successful there as well. Right, 7:49 this morning. Let's speak with Phil Egan. Phil, good morning to you. How are you?
How are you doing, lads? How are you getting on?
Yeah, good. Your take on Frank Lampard? He had to go.
Yeah, I mean, you think back to last season, transfer ban, Hazard's gone. Very little pressure on him, but as soon as the money was spent during the summer, all these players were brought in, you have to deliver. And I suppose Chelsea took a risk by appointing him, thinking, okay, let's give him last season, see what he can learn on the job. But as soon as they hit the sticky patch this season, it just didn't go well. The sounds coming out of him weren't great. He was quickly throwing the players under the bus, and tactically he just didn't look like he was aware enough. I think back to the first half against Manchester City, and even watching the game the other day against Luton, it was all very pedestrian. They were always going to win against Luton. So we knew, I think Frank Lampard must have known when he took the job, things don't tend to end well at Chelsea. And you've got a certain amount of time to convince Roman Abramovich and the hierarchy of Chelsea that you're the right man for the job. And he just hadn't done that in the last few months. It's quick how it's transpired in terms of the last 6 weeks. You think back to December 12th, they go to Goodison Park to play Everton, win that game, they go top of the league. They were unbeaten in 17 games in all competitions. But when you actually look at it and you break it down, they hadn't beaten any of the teams that were really above them in terms of stature in the league. So as soon as they lost that Everton game, then they closely lost. They went to Wolves a few days later, lost that, and things started to come. The wheels came off pretty quickly, and he just doesn't have that experience. I think Jamie Carragher spoke really well about it a couple of weeks ago, where he looks himself like he's obviously in the Sky studio. He looks at Jurgen Klopp and thinks, I'd love to be doing that job, but I want to be doing it straight away. Whereas realistically, look at somebody like Klopp. He had to go to Mainz. He went with Dortmund. You don't just become a brilliant manager straight away. And I think the likes of Lampard, Pirlo as well over Juventus at the moment are finding that out. Steven Gerrard's at Rangers. We don't know how things are going to work out for Gerrard, but certainly the Rangers job was less pressured than the Chelsea job. You know?
I'm not sure if it was less pressure. I think that he's just done a better job. It's less scrutiny from the English media, but I presume living in Glasgow, trying to stop a 9 in a row and then trying to stop a 10 in a row and failing horribly to stop the 9 in a row, and then succeeding, I hats off to Gerrard, I think, for taking that gig, because it was super pressure. Maybe
he was the underdog, though. He was the underdog in that situation.
Yeah, you probably get a little bit longer in that job than you do in the Chelsea job, and maybe that's your equivalent of pressure. But I think that the as we know, the Goldfish Bowl of Glasgow ain't no crack. Last night you mentioned Spurs. The situation there was that we've been waiting for Gareth Bale to have some spark, some impact. Early on in the first half, it looked like Gareth Bale just wasn't really going to be capable of having any impact, and then all of a sudden he scored. What was his actual quality of his performance like?
He was okay. I mean, there was one stage he got the ball in the first half and he was on the right-hand side, and you think the old Gareth Bale would have just driven in on the left and smashed it in. But he went on his right. His right foot is decent anyway, but he put it into the side netting. Now, the goal itself, I think it's all about the ball in from Lucas Moore. It's a great ball, and Bale times his run perfectly. The right full plays him on and just gets a little touch in it. But I think when Spurs brought Gareth Bale back, I was not expecting him to be a regular. I thought he'll come up with a few moments where maybe with half an hour to go, Jose Mourinho turns to Gareth Bale and says, look, we need something special. He has a bit of fire on that left foot that he could crack one in from 30 yards. Or he came off the bench and he scored against Brighton in a league game, but it just hasn't been great. But what do you expect from a guy that has barely played 90 minutes over the last couple of seasons? He's been sitting on the bench at Real Madrid, and he's obviously, when you see him sitting at the bench at Tottenham, he doesn't really look like it bothers him too much. And only Gareth Bale could tell you, maybe when he retires, he'll talk about his spell at Real Madrid and how eventually maybe he fell out of love with the game and he thought going to Tottenham might get the spark back. But the bottom line is Spurs are trying to challenge for titles, and Jose Mourinho looks at Gareth Bale and thinks, I can't put you in there because my main attackers are Harry Kane and Heung-min Son, and they're streets ahead of you in terms of their athleticism at the moment. They're more durable, and if a chance falls to them, they're more reliable. Yeah,
although there's at least a bit of depth there now, and games like that in the Cup are going to give Mourinho the opportunity to play a more fit Bale later on down the road. We've got 30 seconds left here. Phil, what else is happening?
Okay, well, obviously the win for Spurs. Premier League action tonight. Manchester City will go top if they win away to West Brom. You've got Southampton and Arsenal again. Obviously, Southampton beat them in the Cup. Those games are about 8:15. Interesting games at 6 then. You have obviously the meeting of Newcastle and Leeds. Newcastle in a really bad run of form. Leeds have lost a few games as well. And Crystal Palace against West Ham. And just, obviously, it's something you'll probably talk about when you're looking at the papers, but the All-Ireland finals look like they're going to take place in August now because of the level 5 restrictions. And just before I go, the cricket, Ireland obviously lost the series to Afghanistan, but they're playing the final match in their one-day series, and Ireland won the toss, chose to bowl. Afghanistan 66 for 4 after 13 overs.
All right, good stuff, Phil. Thanks for that. More from Phil on OTBSports.com and on the OTB Sports app. It is 7:55 this morning. Up next on OTB AM, we're going to be joined by Brian O'Driscoll to run through his Irish Rugby Centres depth chart. Stay tuned.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station. Off the ball.
You know, Jerry was an oddball. You know, you didn't know what way to take Jerry at times. Jerry was strongly opinionated. He was controversial. He was so smart, such a philosopher and just a great orator and a wonderful use of the English language. And I'm really saddened, really saddened.
Off the ball. Weeknights from 7 and weekends from 1.
This is OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Check out the Boyle Sports app today for details on which football match is getting the no-lose treatment this week. Plus, study the form with our Racing Post Spotlight before watching the action with free live streaming on all UK and Irish horse races. See the Boyle Sports app for full T's and C's. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie 18+.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
All right, Brian O'Driscoll was with us to talk to us about our depth chart. Brian, how are you?
I'm good, Jer, and you? Well,
Good.
sorry, I'm all right. No, I'm not good. I'm all right. That was the usual answer, but no, I'm managing.
Yeah, it's like zero crack this time. In summertime, it was like, oh, you know, we're all in this together, but it's not now. There's nothing. There's no redeeming features to this lockdown.
Nothing whatsoever. And yeah, it's like the problem is there's no light at the end of the tunnel either. You know, even though vaccine rollouts, it's impossible to know, is it 2, 6, 9 months? It's just so frustrating. And then, you know, it's Groundhog Day. It's just the same. Like even at the weekends when you have a bit of time off, like go to the park, get a, you know, if you don't want to cook, get a box from a restaurant around the corner if you can. I think we're just all tired of it.
Yeah, totally. And the homeschool is that's much fun as well.
Yeah, that's been intense. Yeah, it's like mine are of an age where they really need help, particularly my little fellow who's only 6. So, he needs, literally, his attention span is shocking. It's like a boy of a 6-year-old boy you would expect. So to try and just keep him at it, and then I think as well it's really hard that they, you know, we're not teachers and there's methodology to it, and I think your own frustration then boils up as well when you can't explain it to them and they don't get it, and you run out of options of how to actually tell them or teach them something. I think that's just exacerbates an already difficult situation.
Yeah, it turns out repeating the same thing again and again and again doesn't work. She's like looking at me going, what?
The penny doesn't eventually drop. No, it's just, they just start hating you.
Yeah. The sooner this is all over, the better for all of us. At least we're going to have a couple of rugby matches. We think the first 2 games anyway should be in their bubbles, and we'll see what happens after that. We've been doing our depth chart and there's been a bit of controversy. Ronan O'Gara accurately predicted that Cooney wouldn't be in the squad. He was like, it's either Murray or Cooney. Cooney didn't make it, and there's been a bit of backlash about that. For the centres, I think, fingers crossed and touch wood, at the moment everybody's fit. So is this a relatively straightforward depth chart for the first time in a long time?
Yeah, I think so. I think it picks itself. I think there's been some very obvious choices for a number of years now. They've got a wealth of experience. Certainly, the top 3 in each position have a wealth of experience, and then there's someone that's been on the periphery, or a few people that have been on the periphery for quite a while that don't look as though, unless there's a string of injuries, that they're going to get in. So I think the centres, we haven't managed to work out the perfect combination yet, and that's been through for a variety of reasons. Obviously, injuries to different individuals, so we've been playing different combinations, the occasional loss in form. It's not been that often that we've had a full deck to choose from. So we are looking at the players that are in form, and I think it's pretty obvious to me at the moment who those 2 are.
Okay, so let's start with 12. Number 1, it's Robbie Henshaw. Number 2, it's Bundy Aki. 3 is Chris Farrell. And 4 is Stuart McCluskey. There was a while there where Bundy Aki was slightly ahead and was getting picked in games, but never really when Robbie Henshaw was fully fit.
No, in fairness to Bundy, I think he was playing better rugby at times last year than Robbie. I think There was a real consistency to his performances when he was playing for Connacht, when he was going back from international duty. He was turning up for big games. He was having big moments. Never really disappointed for Ireland. Certainly, he started his international career extremely well for Ireland, and I don't think there's a huge amount between Robbie and him, but I do feel as though when both of them are on the top of their game, I think Robbie offers more. I think he defends better than Bundy. I think Bundy's a very good tackler, but I don't think he reads the game as well as Robbie Henshaw does. Tackling is obviously two parts. It's the actual impact and getting your body position right and winning that collision zone. But it's way more than that. It's the understanding of who you're going to tackle first and foremost. And I think that's where Bundy, I wouldn't say he struggles with it, but I don't think he gets it to the same degree as Robbie. Robbie's ability to be able to see the short runner and understand via the body language of the ball player as to whether it's going to hit the short runner or player out the back, and his ability to read off a fraction earlier supersedes Bundy's ability to do that. And then if you look at both of their attacking game, not overly dissimilar. Robbie's a bit of a better passer than Bundy. Both pretty good collision winners and ball carriers on the advantage line. Again, looking at packing a punch, you say Robbie went at his pump is probably a little bit better than Bundy. So just small percentages ahead of him in almost every area, I think, has Robbie in the number 12 jersey.
Okay, the 13, we're going to do this together pretty quickly, then we might talk about some of the philosophy underpinning it. So Gary Ringrose, is he the clear leader at 13 at the moment? Absolutely, no doubt.
I think Gary Ringrose, from a very early age, from as early as I saw him in I think my final year in international camp, when he came in and was a bag holder, but then ran some plays against us, you could immediately see that he had a rugby intellect, that far outweighed all of those peers that were playing with him, and lots of other players that we would have trained and played against. He understood angles of running. He understood, timing of when to hit a pass, when to drift on a pass. So immediately, as a raw 19-year-old, you could see that he had huge capabilities. And his quick rise into the international reckoning was no great shock, having seen and trained against him. That's the lucky intel that you get as a player, of being able to see what guys are capable of in the training pitch. And I think that's why some guys aren't being included in the squad. And I don't know about John Cooney. Is he just not showing something at training? Because all well and good turning it on in matches, but you have to convince the coach throughout the week that you're the guy that's going to fill them with confidence to pick them at the weekend. And if you don't do that, it's very hard to be selected and build that trust and confidence with the coach. So I do feel as though he offers something that no other centre in Ireland does. The fleet of foot, he's quick, good ball player, occasionally overplays his hand, maybe goes once or twice too many times himself, particularly when you've got, the quality of Earls, Keenan, Larmer, Lowe outside you. They're also very good ball players. So a lot, maybe he could throw the odd pass more and then run as a support player. I think he'll pick up some more trail runner tries.
In your depth chart, you've got Robbie Henshaw 2, Chris Farrell 3, and then it's Jordan Larmour / Tom Farrell 4. We'll talk about Larmour and Farrell after. Is there a possibility that we might see in games like England, for example, they might decide that they want Bundy and Robbie Henshaw, they want that physicality in the team, and that actually Gary Ringrose isn't really up against another 13, he's up against his Leinster teammate?
I think it's dangerous going horses for courses, when you're starting to change the combination, because then you don't get any fluidity as to what your best combination is. I think we're in all of that, we're forgetting, that Chris Farrell's not far off, Robbie and Bundy as well. And I think you can fit Chris Farrell in at 12. I think we've got him locked in as a 13 only. I'm sure, at times when he's playing in the centre for Ireland or for Munster, he sometimes plays in the 12 jersey, even though if he's got 13 on the back for certain plays or in defensive setups. So I do think Chris Farrell has never done anything wrong for Ireland when he's played. Lovely hands for a big man. I just feel as though he doesn't offer that same X factor that Ringrose does. I think if you're looking at playing the attritional game, he's the obvious one to put in there with a Robbie Henshaw. If you're looking at crash bang wallop and getting advantage line and taking someone on in an arm wrestle, which Ireland should never do, that's the combination that I'd be going for instead of Bundy and Henshaw, because Farrell is a real handful. He always makes a couple of yards over the advantage line, even in heavy traffic. He just doesn't have great wheels, and he doesn't have a wicked step that's going to cause a defensive back line lots of headaches. So for that reason, I think Gary Ringrose possesses something that nobody else has, unless you wanted to throw Jordan Larmour in the 13 jersey. But I think Gary Ringrose's ability to defend and read through, similarly to Robbie Henshaw, is very strong part of his game.
There's some talk about Larmour, maybe because of the difficulties he had under the high ball, that he might not make the first 15 for the Wales game. It's hard to tell. It's a bit early yet. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I think he did struggle under the high ball, and you know, when he was playing at full back, I think that was the one question mark around him. Is, you know, he did a vastly improved kicking game from the guy that broke onto the scene. He'd worked, you know, hard at that. But I just don't think, even from a height point of view, but a timing point of view, there just was never that real certainty and confidence when he was going up for the balls that you felt he's going to own that, or he was getting himself in the perfect position. But for some reason, someone was getting an arm in. His timing wasn't quite right. He kind of missed the spot of where the ball was going to come down. And it's an art form, as we well know that Rob Kearney, you know, had it down to a T from very early on and made it look seamless. It's a very, very difficult skill, and one that he's continued to struggle with. And he's only a couple of games back from injury, so we'll cut him a little bit of slack. But I think on the basis of what we saw, you know, and the expectation of wingers, you've got to own your own ball, the balls that's kicked to you, or catch way more than 50% of that possession. And I don't think he did that at the weekend. We know what he can do on the front foot ball with ball in hand. But I just feel as though at the moment he's probably a 23 player rather than a 15 player.
Do we ever get to see an experiment like Larmour in a centre in a match that's big enough so that we can judge him, and that he has a support crew around him where it looks like it would do in a normal environment? And the other one, so Kieran Frawley's down on your list of next gen players. Like, Frawley is essentially another out half who might play at 12, and it would completely change what our attacking philosophy is. I'd like to see this at some point, but when do we actually get the opportunity to?
It's a good question. I think maybe, you know, usually on the summer tour of the Lions tour is usually the time where guys get in where ordinarily they wouldn't get an opportunity to go on tour. You get a chance in games that perhaps don't have the same impact or don't have the same coverage because a Lions tour is going on. If you think about the games against Japan in previous years, or America and Canada, you know, it's, yes, we might be interested at home, you know, to cover newspaper inches, but ultimately everything is focused on the Lions tour. So I think there's an opportunity for guys to dip in and out of the international team there and get a bit of exposure against lesser opposition. Frawley, to your exact point, I don't think we have a 12 that possesses his skill set and could allow you to play the game slightly differently. So that's why I've chosen him in there, and why I'd like to see him pursuing the number 12 jersey as opposed to 10. I think there's more likelihood of him playing at 12 on an international level or for Leinster than there is at 10, considering the quality and the depth that is starting to come through. So yeah, I wasn't sure about him initially. I think he still has to put on a bit of size. You know, he's quite a tall frame, but he's wiry. And internationally, it's a big physical step up. So he needs to throw on another little bit of size. But I think what he's capable of doing, of bringing the ball to the line and throwing passes and the quality of pass, makes him very exciting.
This Six Nations feels particularly cutthroat given where we are, with Andy Farrell being a new head coach who has had some struggles and some wins. and is kind of about where on par with where you would expect to be. But at the same time, does he have the job for the long haul? We're not entirely sure about that just yet. So if this goes pear-shaped, then all of a sudden the pressure ratchets up. So he's not going to be sticking in a match where we've got Kieran Frawley at 12 and Jordan Larmour at 13. That in the Six Nations here, it's like, no, give me Gary Ringrose and Robbie Henshaw all day long, right?
Yeah, correct. He's. You can look at the squad that he's picked for the first game. There's very few bolters in there. He's brought in a small injection of youth, but for the most part, he's gone with the tried and tested. I think he feels. There was a lot of pressure on that Scottish game at the end in the November internationals. To remember that after a really disappointing performance against England and then another one in victory against Georgia, that was a vital win, and it wasn't a perfect performance. There was aspects that were good, but I think he definitely feels he's definitely result focused as well as development focused. I wouldn't say anyone's sharpening knives yet, but you can't, I suppose, change a coach a year out from a World Cup. So I think there is a huge amount of onus and focus going to be put on this year's campaign as to how it goes and whether we've got the right coaching ticket. And it might necessarily be Andy Farrell, it might be somebody else that maybe it just isn't quite working. They're bringing Paul O'Connell in. They've got more IP there. So I think they're building something positive, but now they do need the results to go their way. And if you look at things, the strength of England, the strength of France at the moment, there's if Ireland can do better than third in this year's Six Nations, well, I think that would be a huge win.
In terms of the younger players there, so what's the story with Tom Farrell, James Hume and Tommy O'Brien? Why are they on the fringes of a list like this? Because
they're still, I think talent-wise, they're still behind the other guys. They are. That's the reality. And Tom Farrell, I played and trained with him a little bit at Leinster. He was a nice player, a little bit injury prone maybe back then, but hugely impressed with his ability to be able to move on from Leinster and find a place for him, find a home and become an important player for Connacht last year. Again, he's been a little bit unfortunate with injury this year. Similarly, over there, Tom Daley, another guy that picked up some injuries in the academy in Leinster, but has gone well for Connacht. But I do feel if you're looking at, at top class operators, they're on the rung below the likes of Henshaw and Ringrose and Farrell, and Larmour. That's the reality of it. But I think the gulf is less substantial than perhaps we felt it might have been. I think they'd come in and do a relatively good job for you. I haven't seen enough of James Hume to fully know what he's capable of. I did like the little bit of aggro that he had in the Toulouse game. I think he was just got a little bit narky with someone, little shoulder drop walking by someone. I think that's always nice to see in a young lad, that he's not afraid to kind of throw his size around. He's a big unit, he's 100 kg, 6'2". I just don't know whether he's got the all-round game to make it at an international level. So I'm interested to watch more of him at European level, although I see Luke Marshall's back now in the mix, back from a long-term injury. So it'll be interesting to see who plays in the first choice centre partnership for Ulster.
And Tommy O'Brien?
Tommy O'Brien and Jimmy O'Brien. Jimmy O'Brien's played a couple of times for Leinster in the centre as well. Tommy O'Brien's played very well the few times that he's been given a start. Jimmy probably, looks as though he's a better footballer. So whether, he's not being typecast only as a fullback. I think he's played on the wing. He's played at 13. I think both of them look like nice players. And I'd love to see Jimmy being given an opportunity at 13. We saw Ross Byrne playing there against Ulster a couple of weeks ago and actually did quite well. Maybe it would have been a great opportunity. I know that they had a string of injuries, Leinster. It would have been lovely to have seen Jimmy O'Brien in that 13 jersey to see what he's capable of. He's got an offload game. He doesn't like dying with the ball. He's elusive. So, we should adapt the French approach where we can play multiple positions and don't just hone in on one. provided you don't become that utility back that ultimately only ever becomes a 23-man squad player rather than nailing down a starting berth.
Yeah, the ability to play anywhere, but actually get a run at it at some point.
It's your best players on the park as well, Jerry. You know, and that's the question about Larmour. You know, if you're very attacking you've attacking mindset and attacking orientated. Do you look at trying to find if a Gary Ringrose is injured? Do you look at finding a spot for Jordan Larmour at 13 if you've got a fully stacked back three? I think that's where there is capabilities. Larmour played 13 for Ireland against England in the Grand Slam game over in Twickenham a few years ago. He came off the bench and played for 10 or 15 minutes. Got caught once on defence. It's an art form to be able to learn to read those situations at 13 as well, and that's where Ringrose has really nailed down his spot. But I do feel as though he's more of a bolter in that position because I don't think he has the same vision as some of the other lads.
One last question then, in terms of what you expect from your centre partnership. Like the Mike Catt team hasn't yet fully revealed itself, like what we will be when his vision as a creative force is brought to bear fully on that. So what do you expect to see? What kind of progress can we look for from our centre partnership, and just how they interact with the rest of the team? Obviously, it doesn't have to focus too much on the centres, but what should we be looking for?
Well, I think it's very dependent on what the game plan looks like and how focused you are on launch plays or on setup plays. I'm intrigued to see what the evolution of the November game plan looks like in Six Nations. I'd imagine it's not going to be vastly different. I think they're a small bit caught up in going down too many blindsides at the moment, and they're running into heavy traffic. I would prefer to see Ireland trying to go the same way and try and stretch opposition around the corner. And I think that's where the centres, particularly the likes of Ringrose, will get someone on an edge, just get someone on an outside shoulder and get an offload. And you're not talking about huge, big line breaks here and many of them. You're talking about one or two in a game where you get your hands free and someone runs a great support line and all of a sudden that's a try. That's the difference between winning in the really tight Six Nations games. It's not a multitude of 100 yards of line breaks and tearing teams up. That happens once in a blue moon, maybe against Italy, maybe against one of the poorer teams. Against better opposition, you don't get that free rein. So I'd like to see Ireland, rather than just using their centres as battering rams, I'd love to see the elusiveness of what they can do. All of them can be ball players. All of them are skillful. All of them can offload, push the pass a little bit more and have players running those short lines off them. Because, they're big, collision winners, Farrell, Henshaw, Bundy, capable of throwing those 50-50s. We've seen the success with Leinster. Throw the pass, because that's what we're going to need to actually beat the likes of England and France, rather than playing 20, 25 phases and beating ourselves up.
Yeah, good stuff, Brian. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers, sure.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Right, it is 18 minutes past 8. That's Brian O'Driscoll. We'll talk a bit more rugby later on in the show, but it's time for us to turn our attention to football and the news yesterday that Frank Lampard had been sacked and replaced immediately by Thomas Tuchel. I'm delighted to say Philippe Auclair is with us this morning to help parse this and explain a little bit about what we might expect from Thomas Tuchel. Philippe, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning to you too. I'm not too bad, thank you very much.
Thomas Tuchel was not out of work for a very long time. PSG sacked him just before New Year's Eve, and here we are, barely a month later, and already he's got a job. What is it about Tuchel that makes him so appealing for these super clubs?
I think his personality, even though it can sometimes rub these clubs the wrong way. I think his tactical acumen, obviously, and I think despite the way things finished at, in particular, Borussia Dortmund and PSG, his track record, which is excellent in many ways, which is as in capable of dealing with big temperaments, big players, also capable of bringing young players through, and also proposing, when things work, a football of great quality. So, yes, I mean, he's got a very big reputation within the game. He's had it ever since he started his career at Mainz. And to be honest, he's done nothing to disprove those who've believed in him since then, even though, again, things tend to finish in a bit of a awkward way, I would say, in most places where he goes at a still very young age.
It's worth teasing that out a little bit. What happened in Paris? Because people are like, hang on a second, that's the same Paris Saint-Germain team that were just in their first Champions League final like a couple of months ago at this stage.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, what happened is that, first of all, PSG is a very strange club and very difficult team to control. Let's say that the players have got a record, a disciplinary record, but not in terms of cause, rather in terms of the way they behave themselves off the pitch, which is not perhaps the most conducive to high performance. I've tried to be very careful here. And that it's always been thus, and maybe it can only be thus when you've got people like, Dani Alves and Neymar and Verratti and Rabiot and others of that kind. So it's always a bit difficult to be the boss, really, in this team, as many others have found out. And one of the reasons for that is that the hierarchy in Paris tends to be quite lenient, shall we say, with the players, and not necessarily side with the coach. The players are more important than the coach, and always have been in Paris, certainly since the QSI, the Qataris, have moved in. So that was that. The second thing is that Tuchel is somebody who, when he has something to say, says it, and he says it loud. And for example, when there were disagreements between him and his bosses, in particular Leonardo, the sports director, he didn't hesitate to go on the record complaining about the recruitment. Now, it's not something that you will hear, for example, many managers do in England. And I say complaining about recruitment, doing it on television, in press conferences, saying basically, no, we're not getting the players we should be getting. And when you have got two such strong personalities as Leonardo and Tuchel face to face, one's got to give, and in this particular case, it could only be Tuchel. But he's been like this. He's been somebody who doesn't shy away from confrontation. It was the same thing at Borussia Dortmund, maybe not at Mainz, but Borussia Dortmund and PSG. Things have followed a pattern. So when he has something to say, he does say it, and he stands his ground. And that's why it finished, despite the fact that he'd just taken them to their first European Champions League final, which is quite extraordinary, really, when you think of it.
Yeah, it is. What's also extraordinary is, though, that you take the Paris Saint-Germain job, you know the structure that the club has, and you know their track record. So was he unwilling to change? Did he kind of have an internal clock that had ticked and reached a point where he thought the right thing to do? Was there self-sabotage involved in attacking Leonardo, or did he think he could potentially win that?
I think he felt that he couldn't do his job properly if he were not allowed to go for the players he needed. He had been given a mission at PSG, which was to make them successful in Europe. Because in France, my goodness, they've won another, I think, 3 trebles in 4 years. So he did the job as far as this was concerned. The domestic side was concerned. Though everything was geared towards success in Europe. And to succeed in Europe, he basically said, well, our squad is missing out in these compartments, in these departments. You've got to support me. And if you don't do it, well, I'm going to say something about it. So I think, no, it's more a question of somebody who is very clear in what he wants and how he wants it. There were other moments in his Paris career where, well, actually things went relatively smoothly, and they managed to actually put some order back in the squad. And as we're seeing, Mauricio Pochettino is not, finding it too easy. A coach who has got an absolutely huge reputation worldwide will find that he's got exactly the same problems as Tuchel had, and Unai Emery had, and Carlo Ancelotti had, and Antoine Comboiré had, and you can carry on, and Laurent Blanc had it. Every single manager of PSG has had it. So yes, it's a question of his temperament. He's somebody who stands his ground, somebody who says things as they are and will not budge. He's not going to swallow something that he doesn't want to swallow. He's going to spit it out.
In your estimation, is that the right type of outspoken character that will work at Chelsea?
It can work. It's worked for a few others. It's worked for Jose Mourinho. It's worked for Antonio Conte. You could say that the characters who perhaps do not stand their ground as much as people like Tuchel do have not necessarily been very successful at Chelsea. Andre Villas-Boas, for example, Roberto Di Matteo, even Luis Felipe Scolari. It might be that at Chelsea, that you're in the ejector seat from the second you accept a job. It's the way the club functions. It's driven. It's results driven. It's a model that people find completely crazy, but which works. You just add the number of trophies and major trophies won by Chelsea since Roman Abramovich introduced this kind of method or methodology, and you will find out that they are the most successful English club of that time. So it works, and Tuchel is fully aware of what is going to happen to him in terms of the relationship with the board and how far he can go, how much he can go too far, so to speak.
Philippe, a lot of the reports in the last day or so were saying that the players weren't particularly impressed with how few tactical instructions Frank Lampard was giving. The general impression we are getting is that Thomas Tuchel, he's heavy on his tactics. He has a philosophy. What does a Thomas Tuchel team look like on the pitch?
Very good question, because it has evolved through the years. He has used 3-man defenses, 4-man defenses, 5-man defenses. He's used at Paris. He's been quite bold because he had to accommodate all his star players. So at times he was playing a kind of 4-2-4. He's played a 4-3-3. He's played a 4-2-3-1. He's been very pragmatic in his approach in terms of the type of formation that he wanted his team to adopt. But obviously, tactics is not just about formation. Tactics is also about intensity. It's also about pressing and so forth. And in this case, you can expect exactly what you would expect from somebody who is basically of the new German school. Somebody who's succeeded Jurgen Klopp at Borussia Dortmund, and somebody who also transformed a struggling Mainz team into a team that actually had a measure of success, comparable success, by using a very energetic, very high intensity, high energy football. Also somebody who spends a great deal of time studying the opposition and trying to counter it as much as possible. I know this sounds like a completely basic things to do for any manager, but the degree of detail into which you go is what makes the difference. And Tuchel does that. And he also is capable of passing on the message to his team. And to manage to do that with Paris Saint-Germain, which has never been the most disciplined team, tactically speaking, is quite something, really.
Did he get the credit he fully deserved at PSG? There was probably an impression on this side of the world that he was just walking out every day and rolling out the footballs to one of the most talented rosters in the world.
Yeah, but also one of the most unbalanced rosters in the world, as in, PSG going forward, at least on paper, because a number of their star players have had, I would say, difficult seasons, like Kylian Mbappe, for example, very, very strong. In midfield, 2-3 very good players. In defense, maybe not so, particularly on the flanks, where they didn't quite have the personnel, which was at the same level. And also, when you talk about the depth of the squad, again, going forward, very deep squad, midfield and defense, far less so. So I don't think he got the credit he deserved. I think perhaps because of his personality, he can be quite cutting. Perhaps because, as well, everybody takes success for granted at PSG, and it goes with the job. Whatever you do, you're going to be underestimated. I think this was the case of Carlo Ancelotti. I think it was the case of Laurent Blanc and Gasset, his assistant coach. And it goes with the job, because you're expected to win everything, which is quite normal when you see the amount of money that is spent on players and on keeping them at the club. But yes, I would say his contribution has been undervalued. Perhaps won't stay undervalued with time. I think people might be a little bit more or better disposed towards what you would call his legacy. After all, he was, 1 goal away from, 2 goals away from winning a European title with PSG.
Philippe, what will Frank Lampard's legacy at Chelsea be?
I've got to be careful when I say here, because it's not really Lampard, the manager per se, but I would say the failure of a certain type of model. I genuinely think that Chelsea, when they decided to go to Frank Lampard, had in mind a new strategy. I genuinely feel that they knew that because of the transfer ban and so forth, they needed to bring in those young players, and also what at the time were supposedly modifications to the loan system. You remember Chelsea had all these wonderful youngsters who were scattered all throughout Europe. So they thought, we might as well do something with those. And in a way, when he started, it kind of worked, even if it was quite exciting to watch. But I think then when Chelsea reverted to type this last summer, i.e. when they decided to use the money that they made from the sale of Eden Hazard, and the fact that the finances of the club were actually quite healthy at the time, regardless of the pandemic, and decided to spend close to 200 million euros of net, 250 gross, 200 million net, which is unheard of. I think that it changed. And I find it very difficult to reconcile the Lampard of the first season with the Lampard of the second one. And I'm not too sure that that's the question that I'm asking myself. How much was he involved in this change of strategy? How much was he involved in the idea that the club had to move away from the point of view he had adopted only 12 months beforehand, and forget about the Tomori and the Gilmores and the Hudson-Odois, and then bring in all this wonderful talent, which Thomas Tuchel probably, I think, will find easier to explore and to exploit than his predecessor. So we talk about Lampard's legacy. It's not that impressive, really. I mean, points per game, everybody's seen those numbers. I think 1.67. That's pretty poor for a team like Chelsea. Didn't win a single title, in which, he's one of the exceptions in Chelsea's recent history. And people who say he was sacked very early on, well, not really. He lasted 18 months, which in Chelsea terms is, a decent lease, or an average one. But I do think that there was a change of model at some point, and that it was never really, or it was not clear what exactly they were trying to achieve, and that he probably was not the right person at the right time for this type of approach. Whereas perhaps a year earlier, he had been. I know this sounds very contradictory, but you've got to remember, we're talking about Chelsea here, which is a club which is fundamentally contrarian in the way he does its business, is totally dysfunctional seen from the outside, but has made this dysfunctionality one of the tenets of the way it approaches the way to manage a football club. And I think, in a way, Tuchel won't be surprised by that. He's coming from a crazy place, which is just as crazy, if not crazier, than Chelsea, in a different way. But here, and he's going to find all these young players, some of whom he knows very well, like Christian Pulisic, obviously. Everybody knows that. He's going to have also allies already in the camp. I would imagine Rudiger would be one. Thiago Silva, despite all the reports you've read over the last couple of days, last 24 hours, which are completely rubbish, he gets on extremely well with Thiago Silva and rates him incredibly highly, and will use him as his genuine on-field captain. So he's not arriving in terra incognita here, Thomas Tuchel, which is why I think when you compare two, you're comparing things which are not comparable, really.
You think Tuchel's going to be successful, it sounds like?
Yes, I'm convinced of it. I think that the fact that the titles he won with Paris were won with Paris Saint-Germain make people think, well, anybody could do it. You could do it, I could do it. No, it doesn't work like that. The way in which he achieved what he achieved, despite the problems he encountered, and heaven knows there were quite a few problems along the way, mean that the reputation he's gained in the European and world game is not a reputation he's won by chance. He's not one of those young hipster managers with the flavor of the month and then disappears. Not at all. He's somebody who has actually built a reputation from the very beginning of his career, when he was actually taking care of the reserves in Bundesliga. And also, I think he, at one point, also worked in Bundesliga too. So he's always had this reputation, this going with him. And I do think he's been underrated. I think his character plays a big role for that, as well as the fact when if you're not Borussia Dortmund and PSG, you're expected to win. And it's more the manner of the way in which he parted ways with both clubs, which perhaps has had a negative impact on his image and his reputation, because for the rest, I don't think there's much that you can reproach him.
Philippe, one last question from me. There was this sense that Frank Lampard was beloved of a large section of the English football writers, and that he was given a lot of support. He was shortlisted for Manager of the Year last year. All that kind of stuff that other managers maybe would have got if they were also English. Coming into Chelsea, is Tuchel going to have any difficulty following a club legend here? I mean, he obviously followed a club legend at Dortmund, so he has some experience of it. This is slightly different.
Yes.
And he'll have to deal with, as soon as there's a mistake or anything misspoken, it'll be pounced on by a coterie of writers and on the internet from that core English group who want to defend their Frank.
I don't think he will care one jot about it. His communication skills are good, by the way. His English is terrific, excellent, as is his French. So he's somebody who's going to be able, first of all, importantly, he's going to be able to communicate with all of his squad in their native language, which is a big advantage. You'll find him actually quite refreshing in the way that they will find him quite refreshing in the way he talks about the game. And I also think that the Chelsea fans themselves, judging by the reactions I've seen and talking to a few people, they might see what their club has done with some acrimony, but Tuchel is not responsible for that, and they'll be behind him in no time. Remember, if you've got, and I'm talking about the fans here, but the fans do matter in this, in the way that the manager is also perceived and portrayed in the media. In the end, they even liked Rafa Benitez. So if Rafa Benitez left with his head held high, I'm sure that Thomas Tuchel won't have too many problems on that side, provided he wins, of course. But that's Chelsea. That's part of that particular game. And as to the media, I think you're talking about a certain segment of the media which is not necessarily the most influential nowadays.
Yeah.
And it's true that he has, because of his family connections as well, and because perhaps you will hear a few things maybe on television, because a number of people who are now commentating, analyzing, punditing are people who know him extremely well and appreciate him. Not in all cases, but most of them do appreciate him. So yes, I mean, he will always benefit from the kind of plus sign that goes with being English. And I say English, not British, because it's funny, I was thinking to myself about Brendan Rodgers, who is quite clearly the best British manager of his generation. I don't think anybody should have any doubt about that. And the way that he's always had a rough ride in the media. And Frank Lampard hasn't had. Some people are good at managing those, this relationship, managing the contacts they've got. Others are not so good and don't pay too much attention to it. I think Tuchel is somebody who is keen to communicate, is a good communicator, and whom people will find very quickly is not the kind of manager that you can disrespect or talk, disrespect simply because you quite liked his predecessor and you don't like the way that his predecessor was dealt with. It's not going to happen that way. I think it might have been true like 15 years ago, still not any longer.
I think if Brendan Rodgers wins anything, he's going to be British, but as soon as he starts losing, he's going to find out that he's Irish, just like everybody else.
He's the Andy Murray of British football management, yes.
That's how that works.
Correct.
Philippe, au revoir, merci beaucoup.
De rien, à bientôt.
Philippe Auclair giving us some great insight there on Thomas Tuchel. Are you excited about this, Neil? I have to say, I'm definitely going to be watching a bit more Chelsea over the next while.
Yeah, I'm certainly warming to him. A bit more than I probably had been yesterday morning. Philippe sold him very well, certainly did. Particularly the fact that I was curious, actually, the fact that I was going to ask about Thiago Silva, and he mentioned towards the end that that was blown completely out of proportion. I think Thiago Silva had said it was predictable that Tuchel would have left PSG. Maybe it was taken out of context or something. But one thing I can never understand as well is the languages that the managers know. Like, he's saying he's fluent in English, French, and obviously his native language of German as well. But like, the sheer work that has to go into all of that.
Well, you do it as a kid, and then you keep going. Like, you know, there's good TV. What's the Rosetta Stone? You can stick it in your earphones when you're, you know, when you're out walking the dog. These rich people always have lots of dogs, don't they?
Yeah, they do. The one last point as well is that he was, you know, he mentioned towards the end the perception that, you know, you or me could manage PSG and win the French title.
I could.
Never mind your Amazon Prime All or Nothing. They are the documentaries I want to see. One of those big super clubs deciding that, you know what, we're going to pull in some randomer off the street. He is going to manage our club for a year. Fly on the wall documentary.
I mean, you know, stranger things have happened in world football. It might happen in the Qatar League or something like that. It is 8:40 this morning. If you want to get involved, we'd love to hear from you. 0879 180 180 is the number. Chelsea are and always will be Abramovich's plaything. He's like a spoiled child. He expects instant gratification. The players in PSG are bigger than the club, which is why they get away with poor behaviour, says T on YouTube. I mean, you can give Abramovich whatever you want when you're saying that, like, he's a spoiled child and expecting instant gratification. As Philippe said, he's won more trophies since he arrived in English football than any of the other clubs, and so therefore you can't say it hasn't been successful. He built a team with his money. They built a team that took on Alex Ferguson's Manchester United and was winning titles up until 3 or 4 years ago as well. They also won a Champions League in that time, which would make them the most successful English team of that generation. Man City haven't won a Champions League. Liverpool have just started to win titles and trophies since Abramovich has been there. So, right. John Duggan is with us this morning. John, at 8:41, how are you?
Good, Ger. And Neil, how are you getting on?
Yeah, good. We'll talk about Chelsea in a moment, but what's going on in the world?
Well, I suppose we just have to start with Thomas Tuchel and just the news about it, that he's going to be installed as manager, hopefully for the Wolves game tomorrow in the Premier League, replacing Frank Lampard, who was sacked yesterday. Jose Mourinho won 3 Premier League titles with Chelsea, but despite all that, he was sacked by the club twice, and he says when it comes to Frank Lampard, it's just football, the nature of football.
It's the brutality of football, especially the brutality of modern football. So when you become a manager, it's something that you have to know that sooner or later is going to happen with you.
Now, Tottenham Hotspur will play Everton in the 5th round of the FA Cup. Jose's side beating Wycombe Wanderers by 4-1 last night. Late goals from Ndobele, a couple of them, and Harry Winks after Gareth Bale had equalised to Wycombe opener. Bale playing the full 90 minutes for the first time since rejoining Spurs. Manchester City will go top of the Premier League tonight if they win away to West Brom at the Hawthorns, an 8:15 kickoff. At the same time, Southampton taking on Arsenal. 6 o'clock starts with the matches involving Crystal Palace and West Ham and Newcastle and Leeds United. Now, with the country set for lockdown until early March, the All-Ireland Championships are due to be pushed back. The final is likely now to be postponed until August. The hurling and football siders were slated for July when the GA did their master fixture calendar back in December to split the inter-county and the club seasons. So uncertain when the national leagues now will be able to start as inter-county training, currently on hold due to the level 5 restrictions. Paul Murphy named the Kerry senior football captain for 2021, replacing David Clifford. Andy Farrell, the Ireland rugby head coach, announcing a 36-man squad yesterday for the Six Nations Championship. We kick it off against Wales in Cardiff on Sunday week. So uncapped duo Craig Casey and Tom O'Toole included, but no places for John Cooney or Jack Harty. Tyke Furlong is named and set to return from injury for Leinster against the Scarlets at the weekend. And Down Royal, the meeting, they're off today, lads, because of frost.
Some big rugby interviews coming your way across all of our channels this week. Stuart Lancaster is going to join us to talk about the future of Irish sport and grassroots sports, and then Johnny Sexton later on in the week as well. You tweeted yesterday, Ranieri, Mourinho, Grant, Scolari, hitting, Ancelotti, Villas-Boas, Di Matteo, Benitez, Mourinho, again, hitting again, Conte, Sarri, and now it seems Lampard. Am I missing anyone? Why would any manager take the poison chalice at Chelsea? It's never good enough. No soul. Last night on the football show, Pat Nevin had a great line. The thing about chalices, you see, is they tend to be made of gold and very valuable. I was like, that's why they're taking it. The poison money. It's a money tree.
Poison money. It is a money tree. Roman Abramovich got into football in 2003 because he saw Ronaldo, the Brazilian, Il Fenomeno, score a hat-trick at Old Trafford. He was going to buy Spurs, and then he flew over on his flight back from Spurs. He flew over Stamford Bridge and he decided to buy Chelsea instead. He's always wanted to see this beautiful football played at his club. But I think what defeats that is this trigger-happy TV, finger on the trigger all the time with managers. How can you expect someone like Frank Lampard to succeed if you have that model, given he's a callow, inexperienced manager. Frank Lampard, to me, had, a small run at Derby. He's all about the youth. He's all about Mason Mount, Tammy Abraham, Reece James, Billy Gilmore, bringing these lads in. Doesn't cut it with the model that they've gone through since 2003, with the fact that you had Ancelotti in there, won a league, won a double, sacked second the next season, sacked. Jose was brilliant the first 3 years, let go. Conte wins a league, sacked the next season, wins an FA Cup, sacked the next season. It's never good enough. And to me, it leaves me cold. And I feel, even though Arsene Wenger was there for 13 years and too long, Arsenal last won the league in 2004, you could still see maybe the reason why the club stuck with them, because of the way they played football. They didn't win league titles, but there was a connection with Wenger and the club. Klopp had 3 full seasons before he won a trophy at Liverpool. Solskjaer has got time at United. Now they're top of the league. I just think with Chelsea, it's a bit meaningless to me. Di Matteo was a Champions League, you're gone. Why? What's the point? Well,
he was a terrible manager. He fluked the Champions League, and it was actually somebody else's Champions League. I can see the Di Matteo one, and if you go through them all, I think that the first Mourinho, that's the original sin. If they just had kept Mourinho, he could still be there now, and they would have won much more if they had just ridden that one out. The one point about this is that they found a manager who has European experience at a super club. And like you, I was kind of a little bit like, what's this going to be like? But listening to Philippe Auclair there, it makes sense. It makes sense to have somebody who understands the madhouse, who's come from a madhouse, who's been successful at Paris Saint-Germain. What's the measure of success? He reached Champions League final, that's a good season. That's a pretty good season. Pochettino did the same thing at Spurs, and that was a good season, ultimately. He ends up sacked pretty soon afterwards as well. Like, football is fairly vicious, and I know you say it's soulless, but would you not rather be a Chelsea fan than a Spurs fan with
never
the multiple leagues, the Champions League, those big nights?
Never. What is Chelsea's identity? What is their style of
winning?
football?
Good football.
Yeah. I would say
Zola, Gianluca Vialli and Ruud Gullit.
I would say
they didn't win any leagues when those lads were there.
No, they've won it since.
You can only have a certain degree of sympathy for Lampard because, like, as you mentioned it, you list out all the managers there that you have in your tweet there, John. And like Frank Lampard, the thing everyone's been saying for 2 years is he knows the club. He knows the club backwards. Absolutely, he knows the club, and he knows how they burn through managers. So he would want to have been incredibly naive to have walked in there just over 18 months ago and thought, I'm going to be the one that's going to get time. I'm going to be the one that they're going to be patient with. Like, he bought into that as well, and he's benefiting off the back of the fact that they have burned through managers so much. The opportunity wouldn't be there for him if they hadn't, been trigger happy down the years.
I think if you think though, like again, it was a really excellent point about what happened, what changed at Chelsea from the club who were bringing through those young players and recalling all the young players around Europe on loan. The transfer ban got overturned. It was actually, it's almost exactly a year. It's a year and a month, so it was December 2019 that it got overturned. If they were still on a transfer ban, I think that there's a good chance that Lampard would have been able to continue building with the kids. They would have had no choice but to pick those players, and the team could have been in a fairly similar position league points-wise, but we would all have been like, oh, that's not a bad job he's doing there. Those resources are quite thin. There's no squad depth. They've been able to... But that didn't happen, and they invested all the money, and suddenly they need a manager who's boom robust. And I think they'd picked him with the intention of giving him time to grow the young players, and he would grow with them. But then it was like, we don't need that anymore. We don't have a transfer ban. Why don't we just go back to the thing that brought us the Champions League and all these league titles?
And that shows you got your finger constantly on the trigger of the gun. So Tuchel wins, a league next year, doesn't win it the next year, then is sacked.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Russian roulette's pretty exciting, John.
Sorry?
Russian roulette is pretty exciting.
Yeah, well, I do like the Deer Hunter. I always felt the lads would get out of that swamp, and they did. But Chelsea managers don't. And
I think Tuchel, if he is in that top 4 bracket consistently, and in the mix throughout the course of the season, I think he's fine.
How many managers have Spurs had in the same time as Chelsea have sacked all those managers?
Oh, I can't remember.
I think it's 11, I think. Someone reliably informs me, yeah. So.
Yeah, Juan de Ramos was the last one to win a trophy. in 2008. So yeah, look, I don't really have a leg to stand on regarding silverware comparisons, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just too romantic and idealistic about these kind of things. I just feel that the oligarch money just leaves me kind of cold.
John, we'll leave it there. Good stuff. Thanks
okay.
a million. A classic Deer Hunter reference shoehorned in as well. Brilliant stuff. 8:49 this morning here on OTB AM. That's why you join us every morning on your podcast. You can get us wherever you get your podcast. The best place to get them really is on the OTB Sports app. And there you can also listen to our sports radio station. It's 24 hours non-stop sports radio content. At noon today, it's Alan Quinlan. It's his How's the Head series with Pat Short. At 1 o'clock, it's Keith Andrews meeting Philly McMahon. That's OTB Gold. A Dadcast from 3 o'clock. Mount Rushmore and Monaghan. Grania McElwain from 4 o'clock today, and Cora Staunton is OTB Gold. Talk to us at 6 o'clock this evening, and then the show is live, of course, on OTB Sports Radio from 7 o'clock tonight. We've been talking about coaching underage sport and what it should be about, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. This is a conversation that, Neil, for people who are just joining us, maybe you might recap your own experiences. You loved rugby but couldn't get a game.
Yeah, so it was something we were talking about at the top of the conversation and sparked by the chat you had yesterday with Pat Daley and Jason Sherlock. So I was just running through my own experiences playing sports when I was a kid, and, you know, the fact that I was on various teams from rugby, soccer, GA, and the good and bad experiences you have, and that I was lucky enough for the most part that I was on teams where, even though I wasn't particularly good at the sport, there was a good ethos and there was a good coaching vibe, and, you know, people were encouraged to be able to play as much as possible, and the training was made fun and enjoyable and inclusive for everyone. But, you know, when I first did start rugby, I just happened to unfortunately join a team that was a very good team that had lots of good players that I would have been, you know, far below the standard, and the coaching just wasn't there to include everybody, and the encouragement wasn't there to make sure everyone was out there enjoying themselves. And, you know, ultimately I packed that in after a couple of years when I was about 13, and thankfully a few months later joined a club that, you know, that ethos was there, where we were getting absolutely hockeyed every single week, but we were going out and we were enjoying it all the same.
Yeah.
And just the sheer importance and the effect that it can have on you, and all of a sudden you can absolutely love the sport, as, you know, as I've got to the point now where I'm a 30-year-old man and I live and breathe for rugby.
Yeah, and I think that's an important lesson there, and I'd say a lot of people have, and we're certainly hearing people coming in on the comments, 087 918 180 have a similar lived experience as well. We're talking about this because Sport New Zealand have issued a guideline, and they're working with all the major sports in New Zealand to try and restore fun to sport to prevent dropout. And they want to prevent dropouts because they believe that this has a knock-on impact for the general health of a nation. If you can keep people active, they're going to be more likely to stay fit later in life, and that has a knock-on impact for all sorts of different areas of society, not least the pure boring economics of not having to treat people with diseases. So it makes sense on a social level, it makes sense on a mental health level, and it makes sense on an economic level as well. It's basically a really straightforward public policy, and we're wondering if we could do something similar in Ireland. And we're having conversations as wide-ranging as we possibly can across the week. Last night on the evening show and Off the Ball and News Talk, they talked about grassroots soccer, and we're talking about PE today, and I'm delighted to say Mickey Quinn is with us, a footballer with Emmet Colo, Longford obviously, played in the AFL too with Essendon, and a PE teacher at St Mel's College in Longford. Mickey, good morning to you, how are you?
Morning, Ger.
So look, this is obviously something that we've kind of talked about at various bits, particularly over lockdown with you in the past. More importantly, what generally is your role as a PE teacher? And I'm not asking on a day-to-day basis, but philosophically, what do you bring to it, and what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, look, it's probably for me personally, I'm very passionate about being physically active and educating the youth in such a way that they can have the same kind of healthy, happy lifestyle. So, like, my mantra and majority of PE teachers is to educate children and teenagers of the importance of being physically active, so that they can live a long and healthy, happy life involved in physical activity of all shapes and forms, and that when they leave from secondary school that in 10, 20, 30 years' time, that they still have a grow or an interest in being physically active and to understand the importance of it. And especially in this day and age and the way things are, we're gone through 11 months of a pandemic so far that kids' physical and mental well-being, it's going to be the next big crisis. You can see it already with the obesity levels, but the mental well-being crisis that's going to come from all this and the effect that it's going to have, it's going to be going on for a long time to come.
Because they're going to get out of habits, or they're going to fall into the two things. They're going to get out of the good habits that they might have had, and they're going to fall into bad habits of, like screen time in particular is one thing that's, we were fairly militant about no screens during the week whatsoever at all. And now all of the schooling is happening on screens. So they're literally just sitting there. Whereas previously they had to get up in the morning, scoot to school, run around at break, run around at lunch, scoot home, and then we try and get them out again. Now it's like they're getting out once. Nathan was talking about his kids have Fitbits.
And I heard Nathan saying that about the step count. And look, at the step count's a great way of gauging and getting a rough idea of where things are. But when you look at this CISPA study from 2018, where I think it's 63% of primary school kids are getting over the recommended 2 hours of screen time, and is it 43% for post-primary? That must be just 100% kids nowadays, the way things are. And, sitting down having a Zoom class, or especially with PE, it's not really ideal. Yesterday, a perfect day, just get outside and get away from it. I had a Leaving Cert PE class, and you're trying to teach about all the importance of nutrition, X, Y, and Z. But the most important thing is just getting out and moving, sitting them down. They were after sitting down for 4 or 5 hour classes during the day. Last thing they wanted was to be sitting down again. It's not conducive to what you're trying to teach. So you're trying to strike a balance. And I think that was mentioned with all the different conversations yesterday and so far this week, that the balance is key, and trying to get that balance across different sports in schools and for everyone.
Look, I'm not asking you to talk specifically just about your own school, really, but how much of an emphasis do we as a country place on PE, on the curriculum? Asking around anecdotal evidence, friends of mine who are teachers are saying, yeah, they do about 1 class a week or 2 classes a week max in PE, and then they were saying, mind you, they'd be doing 3 religion or 4 religion classes. So there's kind of there's a hierarchy there. You kind of see the role or the value that we place as a society on PE, because I think schools are mandated to do at least 1 PE class a week, and a lot of schools choose to do the bare minimum.
Yeah, look, every school is going to vary slightly with how hours are designated and stuff like that. But, I sat down last night and started to jot down a few points, and, 12:30, 1 o'clock comes and you think, Jesus, I need to get to sleep here, because you're passionate about it. And that's why I enjoy my job and I love it, that you're passionate about educating and the importance of it. There's such an importance placed on the Leaving Cert that it's a defining moment in kids' futures or where they're heading in life. Whereas realistically, the 6 months or 6 years after the Leaving Cert, where people and teenagers realise that, hang on a minute, the habits, traits and skills that I've learned or put in place for the Leaving Cert or around that time are what is going to live with me for years to come. And that's why, as a PE teacher, for me, in my opinion, and biased opinion at that physical education is the most important subject across the board. That if you don't have your health, all those other things that come after it is secondary.
Mickey, do you mind if I jump in and ask, I'm out of secondary school, 12 years now. What are the kind of sports that are on the second level PE curriculum pre-COVID? What would you have been doing with the various classes, and has it changed much over the last 10, 15 years?
In fairness, there's been huge work the last 5-10 years with the PEAI promoting PE, the new Leaving Cert PE coming on board for the senior cycle. There's the junior cycle, the NCAA are designing a new curriculum for the junior cycle, so first year to third year at the moment, and they're looking for feedback across the board. Like there's huge changes, and I think the neglect that probably was there in the past on, okay, it's just right, we'll throw out a soccer ball and that's a little bit of an hour of work or half an hour of PE once a week. That's all we're getting. That, you know, that is changing. And I think the importance of it is starting to be realised and understand across the board, not just by PE teachers or in schools, that everywhere, how important it is for everyone's health and well-being. And I heard Pat Daley mention about seeing so many people out walking and running, and it's the truth that so many are, but at the end of the day, soccer pitches, basketball courts, gymnastics halls, Gaelic football pitches, they're all closed, so they've nowhere to go. So of course there's going to be loads out. It's just going to be telling where we're at, and globally and as a country in a few years' time with all this. There's the work that's been done. Each school will differ with their PE departments, but obviously there's guidelines there in place to try and improve that, and you can see it gradually from year to year, the difference that is slowly coming, and that cycle has slowly been changed.
And then I suppose the next step is, how has that all changed in the last 11 months?
Exactly.
What have you been doing with the kids now for the last 10, 11 months?
Yeah, look, for me, and it keeps coming up and different terminologies used for it, but making sport or making PE fun and competitive for kids is the be all and end all. And if they're having fun, they can make it competitive. If it's competitive, most kids want that element of competitive. I think the way sport has gone, that it's competitive in the wrong nature. Right, we're going to play our local rivals under 14 team, and okay, we lost them last year by 5 points. We're going to beat them this year, and okay, we bet them by 25 points. That's a great result. But is that really the competition that you're trying to drive to promote skills and habits for that they're going to stay involved in sport? Not really. Like I heard them talking about the smaller groups, the 1v1s at training, making competitions, to being creative with our coaches, that coaches are making competitions at training rather than big 15-a-side games or 11-a-side games. You know, we try and do basketball during the winter months and get a basketball for every student. And let them out and say, right, free time, go 3-4 minutes, off you go, shooting, dribbling, passing, whatever you want. And then a few kids come up to you after a minute or two and say, can we just play a game? And it's almost that culture is bred in from coaching at different sports, that, okay, game is where we want that competitiveness by playing a game, and games is the be all and end all. And realistically, I think across every sport that we're forgetting that you're trying to develop skills that can be put in place in games. The skills that you'll develop 1v1 in basketball, put them out in a 5v5 game, they're not going to be able to practice those skills because they haven't learned them 1v1. So you just gradually build up from 1v1 to 2v2 to 3v2s. It's a numbers game. Whereas I think across all the different sports, GA soccer, that we jump straight in. We want to play 7-a-side, 11-a-side. And that's where the difficulty starts, that kids don't have the skill level then to mix it or enjoy that competitiveness and fun part at 11v11. So they're not interested in the sport and they don't like it anymore and they drop out. Whereas if you try and build a base of skills from basketball, soccer, gymnastics, any different sport, okay, very games heavy at the moment, but the importance of gymnastics, swimming, that kids understand that and get that from an earlier age, is why it's so important.
Yeah, that multidisciplinary thing is also part of the Sport New Zealand want to stop the early specialisation, and they're pointing to all the research that shows actually you get better individuals, you get more talented individuals, you get people to stay for longer, and it benefits everybody as opposed to it being this competition for hearts and minds where you try and steal them away from soccer or rugby or GAA or whatever it is that your professional or your own personal interest is. Can I just ask you about the stuff that you're actually specifically doing? Because you put up a really interesting tweet about what you're getting your schools to do. So you've got skills challenges and physical challenges over the next 3 weeks. Week 1 is juggling. Week 2 is keepy uppies, hand-to-eye coordination skills. Week 3, Maradona 7, basketball and cooking demo. What's the Maradona 7?
Left foot, right foot, left knee, right knee, left shoulder, right shoulder, head. And then if you can do that, you work your way back down. Right shoulder, right knee, right foot, left foot.
If you can do that, you've got a YouTube channel as well.
I'm not great with the technology now. This Skype call was enough. But yeah, look, I think that's... I'm really passionate and enjoy the skills side of things. I'm very lucky to go to DCU and work with some amazing people. Catherine Woods there with the CISPA study, Niall Moyna, Johan there as well. There's some amazing people that you learn different bits and pieces. There's a motor control unit, and that's what we had to learn a new skill, and the juggling was that skill. So when you see kids trying to learn how to juggle, and you're like, what's the benefit of this? This is stupid. I'm fed up. But off you go, try it. Took me a long time to get it, but it's that perseverance and the resilience to keep trying. And I think it's the delayed gratification. I think that's something that has cropped up across the board, and not just in sport, but everyone wants a quick fix. Whereas a delayed gratification that you're practicing all week, all month, and then all of a sudden, bang, it happens. I think that's something that's so important to teach, and for kids and everyone to understand that delayed gratification, you're not going to put in the work and it's going to happen tomorrow. It's that consistency of work over a longer period of time that eventually, okay, it will happen. And I think the buzzword in a lot of places at the moment is long-term athlete development, setting up this long-term plan and to measure how do you measure that? And I think that's something that Dublin have put in things in place. It wasn't called a long-term athlete development plan back 5-10 years ago, but what they've done and built has led to where they're at the moment. And I think everyone's trying to catch up and play quick fix. Whereas I think you talk bigger scale and you look in New Zealand, what they're doing, that rather than having elite, picking out an elite academy and training them and focusing in on them, that if you actually bring a larger number through from the ground up, that everyone's going to benefit further down the line at an elite level. You hope that as you're bringing more through, that the dropout rate isn't going to be as high. And then as a result, you'd hope that the standards at the top is going to increase too. But that's, how do you do that? For me, it's by creating things that are fun and challenging and competitive for kids that they want to take part and try out.
I think, Mickey, too, what you've touched on there is the benefit of the work that kids do in PE spilling over into the rest of their lives. The delayed gratification thing is a really perfect example of that, because maths is hard, or French verbs can be difficult, or the Tuchel-Chelsea or whatever it is in the other subjects. But if you learn from sport that actually this is going to take time, I will be rewarded eventually if I put in the work, and I need to have some patience as I screw it up at the start. That's a brilliant life lesson to learn, and the easiest way to do it is, like, if juggling teaches your kids how to study properly in other sports, then what a brilliant gift that is.
Exactly, and I think that's the thing with PE, that as a subject, that it's so hard to measure. Everything has to be measured and gauged. Nowadays, that how do we measure success or performance or analysis? Whereas how do you measure the friendships that you made, or the resilience that you've built, or that delayed gratification, or that feeling of enjoyment and pure fun by getting out and being active? And I think that's why PE probably hasn't got the recognition and importance that it has deserved in the past. But if anything, the way things are at the moment, all those life lessons and skills are going to be so important after this pandemic.
I know the new junior cert cycle has come in for a lot of criticism, and look, everything new always comes in for a lot of criticism. Some of it might have some merit and some of it might be just completely, we don't want to change anything. But there's a large portion of the week is given over to wellness. Is there a baked in percentage of that is connected to PE, or what kind of area has PE managed to chisel out on the new junior cycle?
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, it's no more than top down or bottom up with any system, and then micromanaging. You see, the emphasis at the moment in trying to get special needs kids with special needs back to school at the moment, and then leaving certs are the most important. Let's get them back in too. That every school at the moment is going to be managed on a different basis and can deal with things differently. So the well-being in one school might be slightly different to another. An all-boys school in Lampard compared to a mixed school in Dublin is going to be very different. And that's up to management in schools to address what is needed most. And I think that's where, I'm very lucky to be part of a school that is forward thinking, and the importance of well-being is valued very highly in a teaching staff and a board of management. So that's something that we're kind of well aware of, and there's been lots of discussions about at the moment how that will look in the next few years. Yeah, it's going to be super important. Mickey, it's always really interesting talking to you. Thanks a million for making the time for us. Thanks very much, lads. It's Mickey Quinn there giving us some very interesting thoughts about the life of a PE teacher at the moment, but also the role that it can play. And I think I'm not going to put any individual teachers on the spot, but like we definitely need to have a conversation about the hierarchy of where we place PE. Bear in mind that 90% of the schools in the country are doing 3 times more religion than they are PE. And if we all think as a society that's the right thing for the country, then fair enough. But I'm not sure that we do all think that as a society. So it's just worth pointing out. 0879 180 180 if you want to send me any texts on that. You can WhatsApp us free on that one too. Right, so I should tell you, Professor Niall Moynihan, who got a mention there, is going to join Off the Ball tonight from 7:30. He's talking about participation and national fitness levels and much more as well. He's also somebody who's very interesting when it comes to talking about this stuff. But really, it's the comments that we've been getting from people out there that really is making this a worthwhile conversation to have. Coaching underage sport should only be about fun and fundamentals, says Keith on Twitter. That's it. I always felt my job was to try and get players to like the sport more than they might dislike any coach they meet in the future, so they keep playing. Andy on Twitter says, I coach an under-19 side, fairly successful, but at under-15, under-16 we felt it was necessary to step up a year to challenge the group. Unfortunately, we lost a number of players for that reason. Luckily, the club has a second side and most still play, but it's difficult to accommodate everyone. Liam says he quit sport because it got too competitive. Lindsay says, why would you play sport if it wasn't competitive? I think this is the point there that Mickey was making, is that kids want to be competitive, but they're also naturally competitive. So when they're in training matches or when they're in one-on-one, they're actually competing with each other at that point. And no one's saying that we're not going to have competition. It's just that it's not the be-all and end-all until you reach the point in adulthood or under 17 where you're like, yeah, I want to do this and I want to do it really seriously. Up to that point, you're acquiring skills to see if this is your sport or if you're any good at it, or if actually you want to spend the time that it takes to be somebody who is super competitive a little bit later on. And then Andrew Louth, one of our colleagues who is a reporter with Spin 1038, says, I don't know if you covered this element yet, but I went back playing club rugby in 2018, having not played in 7 years. I joined a social team out in Clontarf. Work has limited training and matches that I could do, and the club have been completely sound and understanding about it. Definitely a lot of clubs out there, pardon me, that are willing to facilitate people like myself who are looking to run around a couple of times a week, and it brings a fun element that would have been missed when getting into that 16 to 21 age bracket. It's true, isn't it? Like that's kind of... Yeah, that was your experience.
100%. That's why I went back playing rugby last year. Like, as I was saying, I stopped playing when I was 24, 25, just because work was getting in the way. And it was kind of just getting annoying that I'd be going out training every Tuesday, knowing that I was never going to be around to actually play a match or anything like that. But I'll tell you actually how I got back into it. It was, I knew I was coming up towards 30 last year, and I said, you know, like, I'd been humming and hawing for ages saying, go on, I'll try get out. Even if I'm not around to play matches, it'll just be nice to go out and do a bit of training and stuff like that. And I can actually tell you the day I knew I had to go back out. I was doing commentary of Connacht against Toulouse in the Heineken Cup last January. And after the match, standing outside the Connacht changing room, just the door of the Connacht changing room opened, and I got the smell of a changing room, of the like stale mud and dirt and like deep heat. And it just like punched me in the face. And I was back down in Terranure Rugby Club the following Tuesday night. That just like, that was it. That set me over the edge. I knew I had to go back out. And I think it's like it's true what Andrew's saying there as well, that I think one thing I noticed in Dublin as well is at a rugby level, it's where I noticed it. I've heard it's similar enough with GAA. The sheer options that people have are just incredible. Like the amount of adult teams. I play rugby in Terranure. I'm playing on like something between like the 4th and 5th teams on occasion. So like you're talking 5, 6 adult teams at so many of the bigger clubs around Dublin, which is just fantastic because it means that everyone has a level they can play at. And you're not going out training going, God, do I have to be competing with people who are playing All-Ireland League rugby? No, you don't at all. You can be playing at people who just want to have some kind of an outlet to go out on a Tuesday evening or the odd Saturday morning if they're around to have a kick around and have a match.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
No, it makes a big difference, all right. It's 9:15 this Tuesday morning. You're watching OTB AM. If you missed anything, we just had Mickey Quinn on talking about PE teaching. Brian O'Driscoll was on talking about the depth chart. Philippe Auclair talking about the new Chelsea manager. You can catch it all back on the podcast. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We're back talking rugby in Ireland's Six Nations squad with the Type 5 after these.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB.
Don't shoot. Oh, he dinged it.
OTB live commentary. Never miss the action right here on OTB Sports Radio. Keep up to date with the latest scores on the OTB Sports app. The OTB Sports app. Live score updates straight to your phone.
Check out the Boyle Sports app today for details on which football match is getting the no-lose treatment this week. Plus, browse through dozens of new player markets, all powered by Opta. Shots on target, left foot, right foot, headed goals, assists and more. See the Boyle Sports app for full T's and C's. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie 18+.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette. Made of what matters.
OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Neil, you've been taking a look at the Ireland squad for the Six Nations, and it's not quite same old, same old. There's a few little changes around the fringe, but it's, you know, our depth chart, for example, is when you go through it, it's a very predictable team that I think would have been the exact same team. Now, we haven't done the back threes just yet, but certainly by the end of the last Six Nations, it would have been the exact same team. Hugh Keenan is in the squad, but if we'd done it a year ago, he might be the only change. So we're going to talk a little bit around some of the other options and some of the other names that people might not know a whole heap about. We're going to start with Tom O'Toole.
Yeah, Tom O'Toole, delighted to see him back in. Actually, even just before we start on that, just to kind of go back on what you're saying, is that it's so many of the same faces. I think with change at teams like this and at levels like this, it's we have this notion in our head that when we want change, we want to see a World Cup campaign end and 12 new players in the Six Nations squad the following year. And I suppose the reality is that over the 4-year cycle, you get introduced to a handful of players every year in bits and pieces. And even going back to something Brian O'Driscoll mentioned when he was on with you earlier on, and it's probably something we haven't thought about too much because we've been so fixated on the Lions tour, is that one of the beauties of a Lions tour is that generally that is a summer when Ireland will tour maybe one of the traditionally weaker nations like a Japan or USA or Canada. And that is always an enormous opportunity and a huge open door opportunity for younger players to come in and just get a feel and get a taster for what Test rugby is like. And, it's something potentially we could end up losing this summer if things don't go according to plan. So it is one of the added benefits of a Lions tour as well. And that's the opportunity in the World Cup cycle where you can really you can bring along 8, 9, 10 players who aren't that used to Test rugby and just get them used to the system. But sorry, I completely digressed there. Jump back in on Tom O'Toole. He's someone who, if it wasn't for COVID, he probably would have an Irish cap at this stage because he was brought into the Six Nations squad last year, and I reckon he probably would have got some minutes in that game against Italy if it had gone ahead last March. And unfortunately for him, by the time the Champions Cup came around, I think he picked up an injury just before the Heineken Champions Cup quarter-final defeat against Toulouse. And unfortunately for him, he ended up spending quite a lot of time on the sidelines leading up until the guts of Christmas, coming back in around December. So he was unfortunate in that by the time international rugby came back around, he was sidelined at that stage. And I'm just pleased to see him back in because he's someone that there's a huge amount of potential around. And I think, we have two absolutely outstanding options at tight end in the likes of Andrew Porter and in Tadhg Furlong as well. But outside of that, maybe the options are a little bit older. John Ryan had been a nailed down third choice tight end. He's just the wrong side of 30 at the moment. Finlay Bealham obviously is there as well, who's on the younger side of things as well. But I think Tom O'Toole is someone who just has shown so much potential, and is an athletic player as well, not built in the kind of standard, the classic, just a scrummaging type prop, but he seems to be comfortable doing everything. He's a solid enough scrummager. I've only seen bits and pieces of his scrummage work, but it looks solid enough. Good with the ball in hand, good carrier, puts in a huge tackle count, actually, is where he's very, very good. Excellent in defence and has a good engine, can get around the pitch brilliantly.
O'Toole is second choice for Ulster at the moment, so this is kind of a big promotion. It's a real sense that, look.
To be honest, I'd say he's probably 50-50. They kind of rotate their props a lot up in Ulster. That they seem to. Well, what I've noticed anyway is that they will tend to either start Tom O'Toole and Derek O'Sullivan together, or they will start Marty Moore and Jack McGrath together. That's when all four of those guys are fit. There seems to be a little kind of a partnership thing that they have going on with them, which works quite nicely. But, sometimes they'll start O'Sullivan and O'Toole, other times they'll start Jack McGrath and Marty Moore.
Okay, and look, maybe that's where we get to with Ireland, where you're just in a rotation and your minutes are being managed to the point where it's not this massive drop-off from when Tadhg Furlong used to come off, and now obviously Andrew Porter has played enough minutes because of the year out that we've had Tadhg Furlong gone for. He's had the opportunity to it, and now they need to get somebody else up there, so there's depth there properly.
Yeah, no, it's a good system to have as well, and it was probably an area of concern for Ulster not long ago, but have first and second choice at both tight and loose head prop is in good stock for them at the moment.
Okay, so let's talk about Craig Casey, who is our second talking point here in today's Type 5. The sky's the limit for Craig Casey, really.
Yeah, I think in 5-6 years he's going to be one of these bums on seats players for Munster. He's just so exciting to watch, and probably the best passer of a ball we've probably seen at scrum half almost since Peter Stringer. I know a lot of comparisons have been made between himself and Stringer down to, because they're diminutive figures and things like that, and they're kind of tenacious and snappy, but he's got an absolute zip on a pass as well. And I don't think it's any coincidence that his growth over the last 12 months or so has coincided with Conor Murray actually finding a little bit of form himself as well. So that Murray has someone beneath him in Munster who's probably pushing him on every single week, and he's probably seen this kid come along, and fans are really buying into him. For a long time at Munster, it was Conor Murray was the number one, and a lot of fans were particularly harsh on someone like Duncan Williams, whereas now the fans love Craig Casey, and I think you're getting the best out of Conor Murray as well because of that. Now, I know he's got in there ahead of the likes of John Cooney and Luke McGrath. A lot of people were suggesting Luke McGrath should have got in based on his performance against Munster. He did play very, very well. And then there's a huge amount of people saying John Cooney, he's overlooked again. And obviously his form picked up, I think, over the last couple of months. I don't think he would have deserved to be in the squad for the Six Nations or Autumn Internationals at the tail end of 2020. I don't think he was playing well enough. Now he has come back into form, but Casey was there in October and November as well for a few weeks working with Ireland. They were getting a good look at him in this kind of an apprentice role, and I think he's worth his place in the squad. He's a great change of pace option at some point for Ireland to have as well.
So is the height an issue? I'm doing some Googling here. Antoine Dupont is 3 inches taller than him. He's 5'4", Dupont's 5'7". Is that an issue in top class international rugby? Does it matter?
I don't think it is, because you can actually see it when Casey plays. Like, he will throw himself at the biggest players. It really doesn't matter. I remember I was commentating even on the Munster and Harlequins game a few months back, just before Christmas, and I just thought it was fantastic to see, like, Casey came on and he was standing directly beside Finney and Wycherley, and I think it was Tyg Byrne as well, two 6'4", 6'5" giants, and he's absolutely baiting the two of them out of it, like screaming at them, forcing them around the place. He really, really organises the team really well, and I can't remember who that French player was. I remember it was when Casey was playing in the under-20 Six Nations. I cannot remember the name of the French player now, it's escaped me, but he was this big number 8, biggest player on the pitch, and it was little Craig Casey who put him on his backside, dumped him onto his back. Like, size doesn't seem to be an issue for him.
He's 21, he'll be 22 in April, so it's not like he's a complete kid anymore. We're not talking about sticking a 19-year-old in here. Do you expect him to get game time if he's in the squad now? Will he get game time over the course of the Six Nations?
I'd say at some point he probably will. I think you're looking at Conor Murray and Gibson Park as the match day pairing for the most part. I think probably against Italy, if everyone is fit and things aren't in a desperate state. I can see him playing some minutes at some point. I think if he picks up one cap over the next few weeks, it's a nice return for him.
Okay, Tadhg Furlong. We need to talk about Tadhg, because what's he going to be like after a year out? Alan Quinlan on Monday's show was get him straight in, like, take him off the bench, obviously, don't start him, but get him on the field as soon as you can.
Yeah, I think it's just nice to be able to talk about Tadhg Furlong in the context of we're fairly confident we're going to see him soon on a rugby pitch again. I think, to go back even on the inclusion of Tom O'Toole, I think Tom O'Toole's inclusion would give you a solid indication that they must be fairly confident about Tadhg Furlong being fit and available to play soon enough, because I think if there were question marks over Furlong's availability for these opening 2 games, they probably wouldn't have gone with an uncapped option as the next in line at tight head. They would want to have 2 experienced tight heads there if they didn't think Tadhg Furlong was going to be available again anytime soon. So it's just fantastic to see him play. Like, 23rd of February was the last match he played. Now, I suppose when we look at it, we're saying a calendar year. It was probably only half of that was him out through injury because of lockdown. But I think it's just going to be good. I think Andrew Porter probably, he's done a brilliant job for both club and country over the last 6 months, but he probably just needs a little bit of a break as well. And, I think it's going to be good for him to have Furlong in there to maybe take a little bit of the heat off him, because he's had to put in a lot of minutes. I know in the Autumn Internationals when he was playing for Ireland, he logged a lot of game time in those matches. There probably wasn't the trust bringing on a sub after Porter, whereas I think, there's probably going to be more of a 60-40 or a 40-40 or a 50-30 balance between the minutes for Furlong and Porter.
Yeah, and I think we've seen the benefit of the game time, which I don't want to open up the can of worms again, but allowing everybody in the middle of a World Cup cycle to go off for a couple of years, make some money in France and England, and then come back might not be the worst thing for Irish rugby to consider in the next World Cup cycle. We've kind of missed the boat on it this time, but if you see the benefit of having Andrew Porter play as a 23, 24-year-old, top quality rugby week in, week out, he's gone from being killed against Saracens to being able to hold his own in any match now, and that has happened because he's played. And look, no one was ever going to let Tadhg Furlong leave for a year or two, but maybe we need to start reconsidering these things to give our, particularly our back rows, some game time as well. Let's talk about hooker. we thought we had anointed a new hooker as a natural successor at 2 in Ronan Kelleher to everybody who's gone before, and it was like, well, we'll settle in now for the Ronan Kelleher era and it's going to be here for 10 or 15 years. But unfortunately, his throwing hasn't been to the required standard, and Rob Herring is essentially first choice at the moment.
Yeah, I think he just about is. Now, I think with Ronan Kelleher, long term, he probably is going to be the number one. I'm talking, 4 or 5 years down the line. He seems to be, of that age group and of that bracket, he probably seems to be the one sticking his head up most at the moment. I think with all three of them, there are throwing issues. They're like, none of those three players, Rob Herring, Ronan Kelleher, or Dave Heffernan, are the complete package as a rugby player. But I think Rob Herring is the most rounded of the three, particularly with even just small things like leadership ability. He's been a regular captain of Ulster down the years, so that probably adds in an important side of things as well. Kelleher is a good scrummager is probably the other thing that goes in his favour. So, that was something that Rory Best would have been excelling in, and it was probably it contributed in a large way to the fact that Ireland had a brilliant scrum over those last 10 years that Rory Best was involved with the squad. But there's just an opportunity for anyone who wants to put their hands up at hooker, even outside that trio of Herring, Kelleher or Heffernan. Niall Scannell is, on the outside looking in at the moment, and he, 2-3 years ago, he probably would have been viewed as the long-term successor to Rory Best. There's still ample opportunity for him to work his way back in there. Even someone like Kevin O'Byrne at Munster, or Reece Marshall, who's Irish qualified now, or even up at Ulster, you've John Andrew. There's Sean Cronin could get back in at some stage over the next year or so, because he has that athletic ability that doesn't seem to have left him. So there is an opportunity for anyone, even outside that trio of hookers over the next couple of years, to put their hands up and get back into that number 2 shirt. All right, a reminder, OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. And the fundamental question that we need to answer is, where does Tadhg Beirne get in this team? Because he's playing too well to leave out. He is. It was something Matt Williams and Brendan Fanning discussed on the show on Sunday. At international level, does he seem maybe a little bit small for second row? It seems that Andy Farrell really wants to have a big, bulky, tight-head second row, and Quinn Roux, I thought, did actually a decent job of that during the Autumn Nations Cup and tail end of the Six Nations. I think a good option is, I think you could play Tadhg Beirne as at second row against maybe some of the sides that, against Wales or Scotland, who aren't trying to dominate you physically. Like, Wales are going to try beat you with rugby as opposed to physicality. So I think you can risk not having a big, bulky, tight-head second row in there and play Tadhg Beirne as a second row. I think maybe against England or France, you could probably play Tadhg Beirne as a 6, where it means that you have a big physical, a much larger back row forward. Like if you look through his caps, he's played 17 times for Ireland. 6 of those have been as a back row, so he's played, it's a solid sample size. Yeah. Three of that 6 have been starts as well, so there's enough experience to work there as well. You're dropping CJ Stander, though. Am I dropping CJ Stander? Who am I dropping? You're dropping the 6. Maybe I could play CJ Stander at 8, and I could drop Caelan Doris. I can piss off the Leinster fans as opposed to the Munster fans. Well, go for it. So who are you dropping? I don't know yet, to be totally honest. I'm running through options here, Ger. I do think, though, like if you look at Munster, if RG Snyman had been fit this year, I think we could have been seeing Tadhg Beirne playing 6 a lot more with Snyman and John Klein in the second row for Munster, for example. So is the long-term view that, down the line, that is Tadhg Beirne a back rower? I think either way, you have to try find a way of getting him onto that pitch, though, because he is, since October, I would say he is the most informed player in Irish rugby. Okay, well, let's play it out. It's Doris or Stander you have to drop to make room for Tadhg Beirne. And to go back to our Russian roulette theme, gun against your head, what are you doing? I'll just about drop Stander. Right. Or just about. Or does this just automatically mean that Beirne is a sub because he's so versatile? Possibly. I think worst case scenario with Beirne, he's going to be involved in a match day squad because he can cover you in so many areas. Yeah, and I think it's probably horrible for him to hear, but if you're a coach, you're looking at that like, come on down. I don't need to have a 6-2 split because you're 2.
You're essentially 1.5 for me here on the bench. All right, I asked Quinny the question. Are you optimistic about the Six Nations?
A bit.
That's
like,
not...
You know, it's kind of like... I think we're probably looking at 3 wins, 2 defeats, which is a kind of a... You know, it's not the worst, but it could be a lot better. I think it's a...
Who's going to beat us?
I think we'll lose against England at home. And I actually think we might beat France at home and could slip up in Murrayfield or Cardiff.
Big first game. Good stuff, Neil. Thanks very much.
No worries.
It's 9:34 this morning, OTB AM live every weekday morning from 7:30. Tomorrow morning we're going to hear from the AFL star Orlo Dwyer. We're talking about Kerry's new captain Paul Murphy with Owen. There's reaction to tonight's football, and we'll continue our series on the future of Irish sport. Right now we're bringing you Pat Nevin talking about Chelsea's decision to sack Frank Lampard. Enjoy.
Making all the headlines today. 42 years of age, Frank, and he knew this day would probably come at Chelsea one way or another. As it happens, it's come 18 months into his 3-year contract. Thomas Tuchel will take over, recently departed of PSG. Chelsea obviously beat Luton 3-1 yesterday, but Lampard's fate was already sealed. 6 losses in the Premier League thus far, 5 in their last 8, 11 points off top spot, and this after 220 million sterling was spent over the summer. The music we played can only mean one thing. Pat Nevin, evening.
Good evening, Joe, and good evening, everyone. How are we doing?
Good decision, bad decision?
Wouldn't have been the decision I made, considering what I'd done last season. I think getting 4th last season with not being able to spend any money, losing Hazard, bringing all the young kids through. So getting top 4 was really quite good and quite enjoyable football last season. Got to the FA Cup final, got to beyond the group stages in Europe. Started this season 6 weeks ago, top of the league. And then suddenly, in a short period of time, you have a bad spell. And if you compare it, 2 weeks before that, you know, when Frank was at the top of the league, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was in 15th place with Manchester United. And the madness of this league is that anything like that can happen in any period of time. Chelsea have not been playing well recently, and they've looked a bit rudderless and shapeless. There's no doubt about that. I don't think anyone would argue with that. And definitely not getting the best out of certain players, quite specifically Werner and Havertz. So there's ups and downs, positives and negatives, but you know, and to go this period of time and be kind of successful as you're building something that was suggested at the start of his tenure that that's what's going to happen. You're going to be brought in, bring on the kids, bring in new players, but make sure they're pretty young, most of them, and you can build something for the future. And wasn't it far off target for the vast majority of that time? So to then, very suddenly, just pull the rug from under him. At any other club, I'd be absolutely shocked. At Chelsea, of course we're not. Of course we're not shocked at all. And the 2 caveats are, look, we know there was problems in the team recently, but the biggest caveat being, this is how Chelsea do it. And they change their managers every year or 2. And it's hell of a successful for them. You know, and I wouldn't argue that this could actually work out very well for them, because they might get Tuchel in, and he might do incredibly well. I wouldn't be surprised if he does well, because there's a good squad there. But it seems desperately unfair in Frank Lampard. But hey, said that about a few managers before.
So I know you liked Lampard and thought he was doing a pretty good job in the main. If there was an argument, maybe not to sack him, because I take your point on how early it is in his reign to sack him. If there was an argument, not so much not to sack him, but against him, if there was a question mark brewing, what might that have been if I had to ask you to kind of summon that argument?
Oddly, here's an odd thing. I was at Everton last night, the Everton game against Sheffield Wednesday, and they named their team, and I thought, oh, you've picked your best team. I can't remember saying that about Chelsea for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what it is. And the squad isn't that balanced way that you know what the best ones are. You know, everyone playing well, I could probably have a decent go at what the best team is. Whereas you look at Everton, you know what their identity is. You know the direction is. You know that when it's not going that direction, they've got a manager in Ancelotti who will find another way and be competitive that way. And I just think it was a wee bit more difficult. It didn't seem that way for Frank and for Chelsea.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest argument to make. And you look at quite closely at the statement that Chelsea released. It was that suggestion of they couldn't see the direction either. And that's the argument against it. And I think they were fairly upfront about it, Chelsea, weren't they? I mean, they kind of quite clear about what they thought. And it actually was quite harsh, that, to say we couldn't see the direction that we go. We didn't say that wording, but that's what they were saying.
Yeah.
And do you know what? There's an argument there. There is. I like Frank, and I'm on Frank's side, and I would love Frank to stay, and I'd have kept him on. But I absolutely accept that as a point of view.
Yeah, no, there is an argument there, because you can imagine, as to your point about the fact that this has been a successful model for Chelsea, even though it goes against the great advice of football worldwide to give your manager time. It has been so successful, and they've won 2 Premier League titles in the last 5 years. You don't think of Chelsea as being that successful, but they won one in 15, they won one in 17, and you could imagine a more experienced manager than Lampard, like Conte, to go back to a recent example, pitching up, looking at that group of players and magicking up the formula, unlocking the potential that's clearly there, and that is the argument against Lampard. The argument against still is that if you give him more time, he would have got there. The problem is they hired somebody with no CV. It's a bit like the Solskjaer thing. What are you putting your faith in that this is the man to get you through the sticky part? United have stuck. Chelsea have said, well, we're done.
I think it comes down to a word: time. Are you willing to give people time? Chelsea aren't and haven't been.
Yeah.
I just thought this was the one thing they would do differently. Just because all the things that were said at the start, because of the types of signings, because of the way that they encourage bringing those kids on. I mean, Mount has done pretty well. Abraham's done really well, and Patches is, just goes a trick at the weekend. That's not too bad either. Reece James he's had really phenomenal moments as well, and Hudson-Odoi's coming back on a little bit of lift as well. You see that we Billy and Gilmour in the midfield. I mean, he looks as if he's just about to come, but all of them are still, I would say, a year away, maybe a bit more, from being the fully fledged thing. And they still have got that youthfulness and the mistakes of youthfulness and the inability to control games that youthful players can sometimes have. And they may well have got that. And they may well still get that. I wouldn't be surprised if they do. But it's kind of painful. And if you're a Chelsea fan and you're not saddened, then you're not a Chelsea fan at this point in time. And that's the one thing I'd say about it. The one thing you mentioned, in fact, and I've always said this, and I've said it to you many times over the years, it's a system that works. It's a methodology that works. Real Madrid have done it, and for many years it worked for them. But, and it's got a massive but attached to it, it is one expensive way to do it. And it will lead to massive mistakes. Because the next manager comes in, be it Thomas Tuchel or whoever, right? There is no chance that he's going to say, I'm going to build that young player up. Why would he do that? There's no reason why you should do that. You got to get, as Mourinho did, the players on the pitch. As everyone else did, get the players on the pitch. Kids, tough luck. Got to wait, because I'll lose my job if you don't. Downside of that, the biggest downside, there's 2 downsides to that. One downside of that is those kids don't develop as quickly and might never develop as well as they should have done. The second downside of that is you miss good young players, such as De Bruyne, such as Salah. You don't wait, and you can't wait, because the manager's not got any opportunity to wait. And I've just got to hope that the football club understand that. Had they sat and waited with whatever manager it had been, and allowed De Bruyne to develop, and allowed Salah to develop, and given somebody 3 or 4 years, look at what you could have now. It might have been might have been. You put 9 duds alongside them to still be a brilliant team. And that's the kind of upsetting thing. People are short-termist in this game, in this world, just now. And it's got a downside, and it really has got a downside.
The briefing and counter-briefing has begun in earnest, as always happens with these things. So, for instance, between The Athletic and The Mail, I'm reading that the club were unhappy with his treatment of Kepa. They felt he could have rehabilitated Kepa with the right man management. Lampard wanted rid of Rudiger, didn't rate him, and the hierarchy there didn't go along with that. Lampard wanted Rice. There was a nervousness, it seems, at a hierarchical level over spending 70 million quid on a player they released as a teen. Marina Granovskaya.
Granovskaya.
Yes, thank you very much. So she's become an unbelievable, powerful person at the club, at board meetings informally since 2010, and now very much an official voice. It seems her and Lampard were clashing. I don't know the truth of any of that, and equally I don't know to what extent, Pat, and maybe you've more of an inside track on this. Ziyech, Mendy, we know Lampard wanted a keeper, but Ziyech, Werner, Havertz, Chilwell, are these Lampard signings? Is he totally on board with this? These are the players he wants? Because, you know, if it's an imbalanced squad, then someone has to take the blame for that, and it may not be Lampard.
There is absolutely no way of knowing. None at all.
Okay.
You can guess. You can be hypothetical arguments about it. You mentioned all those names. There's another name you need to throw in there. It's better check. So, you know, you've now got power bases at different parts of the club. Now, as I say, I've worked in smaller clubs, but I've worked in those situations where you've got executive director of football, manager, chairman, owner, all that sort of stuff. There are power bases. And see if they're not all pushing in the same direction and want the same things and have a shared belief and a shared vision, you've got a problem. And the only way to overcome that problem is quite simple. You trust in one. Now, our attitude is generally we trust the manager. That's the kind of, this part of the water kind of way, you know. Over in the other side of the English Channel towards Europe, other teams don't do that. I mean, PSG don't necessarily do that. Real Madrid definitely didn't do that for years as well. So there are different methodologies and different ways of looking at it. I think Bayern, for a period of time, they were absolutely, the manager was there as he wasn't the manager, he was a coach. Yeah, we'll do the managing, you do the coaching. And maybe that's where you fall between two stools in that situation. Problem is with Chelsea, and one or two other clubs, you have no idea where the power base is from the outside. And I would absolutely be stunned if you ever find that out. Even Frank goes or whoever's gone, funny they never speak about it, innit? Because they won't be allowed to speak about it when they leave and the agreements they make when they leave. It takes you to another point, if I can slightly go off a tiny little tangent on it, but it's still about Chelsea. Very noticeable, for the first time ever, Roman Abramovich's name was on this statement. He was actually talking. Now, that's actually stunning, because he doesn't do that. Yes, and well done with a picture there. You guys are good. But he said that because this was the time where it couldn't be a collegiate decision. The board said, right? Because as you suggest, someone's going to point to Marina, someone's going to point to Petter, someone's going to point to the new chief executive, someone's going to point to the chairman, There's only one person that can take this hit. There's only one.
Yeah.
It's only Roman. Because Roman, as every Chelsea fan knows, we know that he put in all those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. And with his methodology and his money, Chelsea are a million times bigger, better, and more successful club than they were without it. So you kind of, you don't struggle to accept it, but you harumph a wee bit.
Yeah.
But they will accept it.
He's cashing in some chips on this one. He's pulling rank. So there you go. I mean, you just wonder. They must not have seen a way out of this if they couldn't have given him another 6 months. You know, Abramovich is talking in the statement about the excellent personal relationship he has with Frank, and I have the utmost respect for him. So it's a personal one in this instance. Thomas Tuchel's coming in. I mean, there had been talk they wanted German experience, and not least because of Werner and Havertz. So they've got it. Now, so two questions in one on Tuchel. One, is he going to see the magic formula that Lampard couldn't see? Is he going to find the best team that really works? And secondly, I mean, all I've heard the last 2 years is Leonardo and Thomas Tuchel at war with each other at PSG. Like, Tuchel does not take orders lying down, and he fell out with the board at Dortmund as well. He won the cup in his last kind of week at Dortmund, and he was at war with them as well, and left in similar circumstances. So Dortmund, PSG, he's got a nice track record here of not liking when he's told what to do. So he's pitched up at Chelsea.
Yeah, it does sound a wee bit like a marriage made in hell in that way, but that doesn't mean it won't work. You know, well, it's every chance. I thought Mourinho go to Spurs was that's another marriage made in hell. There's two personalities that are going to absolutely explode in each other one day. But one day. But, in Spurs' case, they would hope it's 3 or 4 years down the line. In Chelsea, maybe they just shrug their shoulders and say, well, it'll happen in 18 months or 2 years' time, and that's fine, that's okay, we'll get the next one in. It would be nice where, I would say outrageous things like, See someone like Stevie Clark, who's currently the Scotland manager, who just technically does everything quietly, not trying to be showy, not doing anything. See if you stuck him in with that group of players, and people go, oh, he's not a big enough name. Have a look at who that guy has worked with over the years and how he's coached and who he's got the best out of, when he was the number 2, even before he'd got the number 1 job in a number of places. I wouldn't be surprised if someday him would have done a brilliant job. There's lots of talk about Brendan Rodgers being the manager. Well, I suspect he will be someday. That's not really that big a call, is it? Like, you get a manager every 2 years and somebody like Brendan who does really well. So there's plenty out there that they can have a go for. The one person that probably has dropped away down the queue, who was probably quite high for a while there, was John Terry. And his queue's jumped way down because they've tried the rookie manager one. It may well be that someone like John Terry is thinking to himself, I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to do it the kind of Steven Gerrard kind of way. I'm going to take my time, learn all the ropes, do it through 3 or 4 clubs or whatever, smaller, lower league even, when he takes his first managerial position. And when the time's right, he'll take it. Frank didn't wait, and it may now feel as if it was the wrong thing from his point of view, because had he waited 7, 8, 9 years, he might have said to himself, well, it might never happen, it might never come. Will always be there in Chelsea. There'll always be opportunities.
Yeah, I can see why he did it, though, because if he does 7, 8, 9 years, which are okay, then maybe he doesn't get the Chelsea job, and it's hard to turn it down when you have an opportunity to jump so many rungs in the ladder if you do a good job at Chelsea. And where he pitches up next, actually, is really interesting.
Yeah. I still don't think... I mean, one or two people have said to me today, like, well, who's going to take the job now? I mean, that's the job. That's becoming a poison chalice. Things about chalices, they're made out of gold usually, and they're really, really valuable. And so is that job. Very valuable. And, the payoffs themselves is not bad. So, the downside of that job is actually not massive.
No, I don't think people hold it against you too much for getting sacked at Chelsea, and it's the easiest 10 million in your life.
Yeah, A, that, and B, people will, when this calms down over a few days, and people will remember back in time, because it will calm down, and they'll think, Frank, what did you do? Actually, that first year was really good, and you developed a lot of young players, and the style was quite exciting, and you had a good start to the second season, then you had a bad little period. I think that still leaves his CV in a decent place, a very decent place.
We've about 3-4 minutes here, so Old Trafford. Where do you want to start? I want to start with how serious is this for Liverpool all of a sudden? What's jumping out to you?
The thing that I really have to carefully choose my words all the time here. What I've been expecting to happen to Liverpool for such a long time. And hands up, I thought it was happening 2 years ago. I thought it was happening last year. But that limited squad is going to come home to roost. You need real quality in the end. And it's just keeping it up for all this time. And by the way, this is not an abuse of Liverpool. This is a wow of Liverpool. How they managed to keep it going for quite so long is extraordinary. Yeah. And then you looked at their bench, and you compared their bench to like City or even Chelsea. And you think, how are you doing that? It's incredible. It's been brilliant. But it will come home to roost, and it has now. They're knocking another centre-back to cover for Van Dijk, who's obviously going to come home to roost as well. Are they going to suddenly become a terrible team? And no, they're not. They're going to be okay, but are they favourites to win this league? No, they're not. I would, honestly, predictions are daft at the moment, but I mean, I would, if I had to put money on, I'd put more money in United than I'd put Liverpool at the moment for this league, this season, just because of, the way the team looks really balanced. And we've talked so many times, but what a different team when Pogba decides to put in the effort. It's extraordinary. You may look up now, I mentioned the show a few weeks ago. Keep watching that guy. See when he plays, and he plays a pass and then moves, he's brilliant. See when he plays a pass and then stands and watches it, you're playing with 10 men half the time. And I've been trying to get in my head the reasons why, and I think a lot of people feel he's looked at Bruno Fernandes and thought, well, he's the big cheese now, and I want to be the big man, I want to be the main man, and it's kind of riled him. And I think there's also a bit of a looking at McTominay beside him and saying, all right, okay, that kid's doing the stuff that I should be doing, work rate-wise. If I do the work rate that McTominay does, and I've got the skills on top of that I've got, I can do something really special. And it's taken a while to get through. So you stick him on top. And as was said, someone said last night, I was chatting to him about the game after watching it, Cavani in fact, it was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer that said it, Cavani's a really clever player.
My favourite thing is when Cavani loses his temper at some of the youngsters making bad decisions, because he can see it all.
Yeah, and he is. He's so clever. He's clever in every way. He's clever and intelligently knowing where to make the runs. He's holding up the balls good. He's dragging people, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But getting that free kick, I mean, seriously. Honestly. Defender's standing there doing nothing almost.
Yeah.
And he lying on the ground, he's got the free kick that's got them the goal, that's got them through. And it's, you know, I mean, I personally, in times gone by, I wouldn't give a free kick for it.
Yeah.
But you get free kicks for that now. So he is clever. And so that I'm impressed with. And I mean, as you well know, and as anyone's listened to us for a while, I've never had a downer in Ollie, Gunnar Solskjaer. And I certainly didn't think we should be sacked at the time when everyone was screaming at the top of the rooftops at the start of the season. But he has slightly surprised me doing as well as he has.
It's going very well. Nobody's injured. Everyone's confident. I mean, it's everything that Lampard didn't have. I mean, momentum is all important. They do look like a bunch who are, you know, just on a roll, and they go behind in a game and it's not a big deal. On Pogba, very last one briefly. It was interesting. It was him and McTominay yesterday as opposed to McTominay and Fred, and we don't trust you to be one of those two midfielders, almost like a trial for him. Well, let's see, you've been looking a bit better, go in there and see, can we trust you in there? Can they trust him in there, do you think, medium term for the rest of the season in those bigger games?
Just watch him in training, watch him in every game, and if he drops it, he drops it. If he drops it, you move him out again.
Yeah.
And just, that's it, simple as that. The problem with Pogba and one or two other types of players, the kid gloves approach just doesn't work. It really doesn't work, and treating them specially different from anyone else. You're a footballer, mate. If you're the best player for that moment and you're putting in the effort and the time, you get a game. If you don't, you shouldn't. And I think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has shown that. And because he's shown that so, you know, I was going to say strongly, but just calmly.
Yeah, calmly,
just very calm.
Yeah,
just, I'll do that, and it won't bother me. And I think the penny's dropped. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if between now and the end of the season, Pogba can see a title flag. And I wouldn't be surprised if he sticks at it. And, you know, hands up, I'm the person that will immediately say when he's not doing it. But I'm a big enough person to say, yeah, he is doing it now. And I'm really impressed, but I really like it.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.